weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, and on the GB News app. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with GB News Radio. We are the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes. Thank you for joining us on GB News, Britain's news channel. A very, very good afternoon to you. It's 3 p.m. and I'm joined in Westminster by a farmy army. An army of farmers at the protest today. We're right from the heart of Westminster, of course. I'm broadcasting all across the UK. Today, Westminster was a sea of woolly hats and wellies as over 10,000 British farmers gathered to roar a message of defiance to our government. Jeremy Clarkson bellowed back down, and the NFU president demanded a sit-down with a reluctant Rachel Reeves. Throughout today's show, I'll be joined in the GBNews studio by key leaders, there we go, and tractors, activists and farmers who are standing together crying, enough is enough. No farmers, no food. And meanwhile, as farmers fume in their freezing fields, our Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, is living La Vida Loca. He's 6,000 miles away in subtropical Rio at the G20 summit. But he says he gets it, as he told GB News today that his first job was on a farm. We'll hear from the Prime Minister live at 5 p.m. Too much sniggers here in the studio. And as temperatures plummet and snow falls across the land, British pensioners are bracing themselves for a long, cold winter in the wake of Labour axing their winter fuel allowance. Today I'll speak to the founder of thepensionervote.com, who says an army of VIPs, very irritated pensioners, could cause Labour yet another headache. And with farming on its knees, pensioners feeling the freeze and council tax going through the roof, is it any wonder that G&T has replaced the Great British Cuppa as the nation's favourite drink? I'll raise an ice and a slice to this simply gin-credible tipple later in the show. Welcome to the show, and look at the studio, this wonderful studio packed full of British farmers and their children, putting food on your table, bacon on the table every single day. These people matter today. They wanted to be listened to, and we will give them a voice on GB News. We're right in the heart of Westminster. It's warm in here. We gave them a cup of tea, and we're about to listen to what they've got to say. What do you make of today's performance at Westminster? Jeremy Clarkson, I thought, was on particularly good form, despite the fact he's had a recent heart scare. What do you make of the political response? Is it enough? Do you think they're going to listen? Will they listen to these farmers? Will they hear their roar? Or simply, to use another farming pun, try and pull the wool over their eyes? Will that wash? Should there be a fight back? Get in touch, gbnews.com/your say. But now it's your news, and here's headlines, and here's Sophie Reaper.
Thank you, Martin. The time is just after 3 o'clock, and these are your latest GB News headlines. Farming leaders have accused the Chancellor of refusing to engage with them over controversial changes to inheritance tax as thousands of farmers have marched on Westminster. First unveiled in Rachel Reeves' budget, the plans to impose inheritance tax on farms worth more than £1 million has sparked fury among rural communities. The president of the National Farmers Union says Labour has destroyed a contract between farming and the government dating back to the Second World War with its changes to inheritance tax. However, Environment Secretary Steve Reid says due to inheriting a £22 million black hole from the previous government, Labour had no choice.
This government's commitment to farming and to farmers is absolute. That's why we've allocated £5 billion to farming in the budget. That's the biggest amount of money in our country's history for sustainable food production. but we have to plug that £22 billion black hole in our public finances. Otherwise, we can't fix our public services like the broken National Health Service. So it's only right that we've had to ask the wealthiest landowners and the biggest farms to pay their fair share. But I would emphasise only around 500 farms will be affected. The vast majority of farmers will pay no more under the new scheme than they do under the current one.
Speaking at the protests in Westminster, Shadow Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, Victoria Atkins, says the impact on farmers will be huge.
The real-life impacts of this are enormous because we know already around kitchen tables in farms up and down the country, farmers have got advice from their accountants, from their business advisors, and they are deeply, deeply worried and distressed that if older members of the family live past March 2026 when this change comes in, then they are faced with an enormous inheritance tax bill when that dear beloved relative passes on. And when I say, you know, huge bills, we're talking hundreds of thousands of pounds, possibly even over £1 million.
Among the thousands of farmers attending the protests today, there have also been many of the future generation hoping to take over their family's farm one day. Earlier, one of the farmer hopefuls told GB News he wants the government to rethink.
It's just important because family farms are what have provided food for England through 2 world wars and up to now. So it's a vital part of our economy. It's a way of life. It's not a job. I've been brought up around farming and I can't really imagine my life without it. I just want people to listen. I just want the government to hear what we're saying and at least have a look, go back to the drawing board and just see if they can do it better and help more family farms like us.
In other news, Russia says Ukraine fired US-supplied long-range missiles into the country for the first time today. The Ministry of Defence in Moscow says Ukraine used the Army tactical missile system in a strike on Russia's Bryansk region this morning. Ukraine is yet to comment. It comes after the US President Joe Biden gave the green light to Kyiv to use US-supplied long-range missiles to strike inside Russia. Russia says it's changed its nuclear policy as Moscow signals anger over the US missile decision. Downing Street responded today, saying Putin's decision to raise the issue of nuclear weapons again is the latest example of irresponsibility from, quote, the depraved Russian government. The Defence Secretary says allies must come together to back Ukraine and ensure Vladimir Putin, quote, does not succeed, as Britain announced further military aid for Kyiv on day 1,000 of the war. The Ministry of Defence says the UK will provide £7.5 million for new attack and surveillance drones. It also comes amid concerns about a potential change of US stance under US President-elect Donald Trump, who says he wants to end the conflict in a day. The £7.5 million will be invested through the Drone Coalition, with other allies providing an additional £16 million, including 10 from Germany, £3 million from Canada and £3 million from Luxembourg. And almost 200 schools have closed in England and Wales, and new weather warnings issued as snow hits part of the UK today. In travel, thousands of train passengers are also suffering disruption due to severe weather. By 11 this morning, around 64 out of a total 120 services planned by East Midlands Railway were reportedly cancelled or delayed by at least 30 minutes. There are currently 3 yellow warnings in place for snow and ice in northern Scotland, northern England and parts of Northern Ireland, the Midlands and North East Wales. For now, those are your latest GB News headlines. I'm Sophie Reaper. More from me in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you, Sophie. Now, Westminster was a sea of woolly hats and wellies today as over 10,000 British farmers gathered to roar a message of defiance to the government. And here are some of them here with me in the studio. Ladies and gentlemen and children, welcome to GB News. And now we can speak to the GB News reporter, Will Hollis, who's in Westminster. Will's not there. Let's talk to a few of you guys first. So, would you mind if I went round and asked you your names and why you're here? What's your name, sir?
My name's Charlie Harper. I'm a 4th-generation farmer from King's Sutton, Northamptonshire.
here to just a bit back British farming. Everything is getting marginalised, and we just sort of see this as the final nail in the coffin.
OK, and so on the end there, what's your name and why are you down here today?
I'm Tony Hopper, so I'm from Banbury, Oxfordshire. And, yeah, I'm just, you know, I'm a fourth-generation farmer. I haven't inherited yet. And I've got a 5-year-old daughter, and I'd like her to inherit the farm as well. But the way it's looking, it's not good.
And you two gentlemen, understand that you're from Banbury, just down the road from Jeremy Clarkson. So Jeremy Clarkson gave what many think was the headline speech today. How helpful and useful do you think Jeremy Clarkson has been in this whole debate of getting this talked about?
He's been very good. I think there was a bit of scepticism when he first came on the scene, but he's done a very good job. He's got a big following, and today wasn't just about him. And he was pretty clear that he didn't want it to be just about him, that it's about all the farmers around the UK.
And do you think that the government is going to listen? I mean, there was a huge turnout, making a loud noise. We're on television now, it's captured the nation's mood. But do you think the people in Westminster are actually going to listen to you?
I don't know. I'd like to think so. Obviously, there's a lot of people out there, and I don't think people really... I mean, obviously, people from the countryside and all that, they see the farming going on, and they're still sort of connected to it. They're still sort of connected to it. But there are a lot of people that just, I don't think they've got no idea where food comes from.
Yeah.
And it's just, you know, you say farmer, it's like a foreign language. So, I mean, I'd like to think we've done some good. I mean, we've been very peaceful, we've been respectful.
Yeah.
What happens next, I'm not really sure. But people can't do without us.
That's right. I'd like to bring in my next special guests, Clive and Henry. Now, you were on the show yesterday. Of course, Clive Bailey and your boy, Henry, 12. You've been talking about this for a long time. It's become something of an online figure. As I know, Ollie has behind us here. Ollie has whipped up a huge social media following, and this has become very much a kind of grassroots movement. Yesterday, you were in the studio saying you're desperately fearful for the future of your farm, 3 generations. Your granddad started it. Do you feel any more positive after today?
Well, I think we've done what we set out to achieve today. It's all about numbers, isn't it? You know, we've been saying right through this that Rachel Reeves, the Treasury, they got their numbers wrong. They keep mentioning this 500 number. I think today, I don't know how many turned up, but it's tens of thousands, wasn't it? So I think that proves that it's not just 500 people. They've got their numbers wrong. They need to get back down, sit at the table with, you know, farming economists and actual real family farmers, and come up with a better way to kind of, you know, define and solve this problem.
Now, Henry, yesterday when I met you in the green room, and I sort of said, would you like to come on the show? You know, oh, OK. And you did. And I said to you yesterday, didn't I, have you got a question for the Prime Minister? And you were amazing. And you did ask a question for the Prime Minister. And guess what? We've got that question asked to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister is in Rio de Janeiro. Our political editor, Chris Hope, did ask it to him. Let's have a reminder now of the question yesterday that Henry...
It makes me feel, like, disappointed in the government because they're taking away something that me and I'm guessing all of my generation of farms opportunities to become farmers when they're, like, older. I'd say just think about how this affects my generation of farmers and how it affects their future of doing something that they've dreamed about for years.
So what we attempted to do there was to get the message across that perhaps politicians are out of touch. And as I said to you, Henry and Clive, and proud mum there in the background, that question was asked to the Prime Minister. Here's what happened.
GBNews, we have a Clive Bailey, his son Henry. Henry's 12. He's disappointed and sad that you'll be taking away farming from his generation. He says he can't maybe not be a farmer in the future. Why are you taking away Henry's dreams?
Well, I don't know the details of Henry's case. I don't know what the farm in that particular case is worth. But clearly, if it's under, assuming it's a mum and dad passing on to Henry, then that would be the £3 million threshold. Yes. So. That would mean it's unaffected, but I don't know the details of the particular case.
So there you go, Henry. That was the Prime Minister. Your name was spoken. He heard your question, and he said, I get it. I worked on a farm as my first job. Are you satisfied that they're listening? How does it feel to have the Prime Minister answer your question?
It feels shocking because I wasn't really expecting him to, like, it to get to him, but I'm just happy that he actually had an answer, and instead of just ignoring the question.
We came on GB News and we did say, didn't we, we'd try and get your question to the Prime Minister. Even I'm surprised that it happened quite so fast, but that's the power of television. And thanks to Chris Hope. We'll come back to you in a minute because we can now speak to GB News reporter Will Hollis, who's in Westminster. Will, we've got a bunch of farmers back in the studio in Westminster. You're still out there on the streets. What's the mood on the ground?
Yes, well, Parliament Square is pretty much back to what would be any ordinary day. The traffic is moving. There are a lot of farmers still around, but the main bulk of them have moved away, whether it's because they're going to meet with their MPs to lobby, as 1,800 NFU members have been. But certainly the 10,000 or so farmers that were filling these streets only an hour ago have moved on to go and be with their friends and their families. But two people who've decided not to because they want to make sure their voices as young farmers are heard is Liam and Lauren. Liam, just tell me a little bit about your family farming scenario because you're only 16, 17.
Yeah, so we're farmer beef, turkey and sheep farmers from Somerset. Yeah, basically family-run farm, parents, a brother and a sister, looking forward to inherit the farm, but unfortunately with the circumstances, are we going to be able to is a big question. How are we going to do it? How are we going to manage it? Of course, there'll be ways around it, hopefully, as we think, but what's the security that there will be? Is as young farmers, as we enjoy it, we work hard, as we have done our whole life. It's demoralising because it's a way of life. That's what we learn to do. That's why we spend a lot.
That's what I keep hearing. It's a lifestyle. Just explain to me your life and where farming really fits into it.
So I think it is just a way of life for me. I feel it is we wake up in the morning, we look after animals, care for them, make sure they're doing well.
You grew up on the farm?
Yeah, so grown there my whole life. Been in milk and parlours since I was 0 days old and still in there now. Yeah, just always getting involved as much as we can and just trying to help and feed the nation, I suppose. But it's how we're going to be able to manage because at the end of the day, I don't think they're realising that if we stop, everything else stops during the whole system. So yeah, that's what I think.
You're down here with a bunch of classmates who are all agricultural students. Lauren, you're here as well. Just describe for me, what does family farming mean to you and how do you feel about the changes to inheritance tax?
Well, it's a way of life and my dad's built it up from scratch. It's actually demoralising more than anything, thinking that his daughter wants to take it on and if she wants to take it on, she's got to pay an absolute fortune, which frankly farmers don't have the money to pay it.
You know those conversations you and your families are having now because of what's been going on in the last weeks. What have those conversations sounded like and how do people feel, particularly your parents that have built up these farms thinking that one day you might take them over?
Well, my dad started from scratch and, well, you have a conversation about selling parts of the farm or the whole farm altogether just to pay for it. It is absolutely extortionate, especially for large-scale farms. It is awful.
If you wanted the Prime Minister or Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, to hear one thing from young farmers who aren't even 18 yet, what is it that you want Rachel Reeves and the Prime Minister to hear?
Well, they're taking away our future at the end of the day. They've stopped us from living our dreams and our lifestyle. And at the end of the day, there will be no farmers and no food if it carries on.
Liam, what's your message for the Prime Minister?
Again, repeating what Lauren said, is I think it is our future, is we thrive to support the nation with our food, quite frankly, no farmers, no food, no future for anyone. And I think something's got to change. I think there's a way it's got to go forwards. How we'll do that is a different scenario and we'll have to decide up to Rachel and the Prime Minister. But it's what it's going to will be, I guess. But hopefully change will happen.
Liam and Lauren, 16 and 17 years old and doing a fantastic job here with their farming friends who have come down as well on a day out in London, all the way from Somerset. They've come from Gloucestershire and even from Shropshire as well. But the Prime Minister and Rachel Reeves say that they've got to raise money to pay for public services, and this is how they think they're going to do it. And they say that farmers, particularly wealthy farmers, need to pay their fair share.
Thank you, Will Hollis there with a gaggle of young farmers in Westminster. Now, just to repeat, we asked the question of Sir Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, of young Henry Bailey here. Put a question yesterday. Here is Sir Keir Starmer's response. I'd like to get your response to what the Prime Minister said. He said, I don't know the details of Henry's case. I don't know what the farm in particular case is worth, but clearly, assuming is a mum or dad passing on to Henry, then that is, there will be the £3 million threshold, so that will mean it's unaffected. But I don't know the details of the particular case. So there you go, no problem. If it's under £3 million, you'll be tickety-boo.
Yeah, right. So the one thing he does say that's correct there, he doesn't know the details of a particular case, and that's the problem, isn't it? They're looking at stats, they're looking at data sheet stuff, they're not looking at the people and the cases behind them. We sat down with our accountant last week, so the first problem he's got there is it's not just about me passing it to Henry. First, it's got to pass from my parents to me. You know, they're in their late 70s, and early 80s. They won't have the time, probably, to pass it to me first. Then the £3 million thing that's getting wheeled out over and over and over. We sat with our accountants last week, 4 hours of very expensive advice, I imagine, and for various reasons, which we can't go into now because it's quite complicated and would bore everyone to death. But basically, those £3 million allowances, in my situation, will not be any use at all.
And that's because, what, you got machinery we saw yesterday is worth, what, kind of £1 million worth of machinery, right?
It's kind of like, yeah.
You got your home, and then before you even get to the land.
And it's a bit of a Goldilocks relief in that if you drill into a detail, which is what obviously the professional advice is for, there's things like the gifting between people and the issue of, like, if either of the partners is over 2 million, for instance, you can't use all of that. So it gets complicated, and that's why we take the professional advice on succession. But long and short of it was we walked out of the room saying we may be able to look at other ways to mitigate and reduce things, but that wasn't an option open to us.
OK, Clive and Henry, thank you for now. Now I'd like to bring in the former Labour advisor and the commentator, Jade Azim. Jade, welcome to the show. So clearly the mood out there in Westminster today is not particularly happy. Farmers have got a beef, you might say, with the government. Do you think the government is sticking to their ground on this? Less than 500 farms will be affected. They keep saying parrot-like, but the NFU say that's nonsense. Jeremy Clarkson says that's nonsense. And a show of hands today of the 10,000 at Parliament. Now, if you're not affected by this, put your hand up. Nobody put their hand up. They are all claiming to be affected by this. Do you think the government have got their figures wrong? And do you think they've bitten off more than they can chew by taking on farmers like this?
Well, first off, I'm very sympathetic to the case, and actually as a Labour person it feels quite strange to be on the opposite side of the NFU. It's a curious case because we can only go from, of course, there are cases where there's real human stories, and that's not always taken into effect when you're sitting behind a departmental desk. But if you look at the HMRC receipts, it suggests that 84% they receive the relief under 1.5 million. That's 84%. With business tax as well, that's 74%. So perhaps these figures are wrong, but it seems if you're an objective minister looking at this, the vast majority of farms aren't affected. But of course, there are cases where the human story tells something completely different.
And it's fair to say, don't forget that back in March there was a farmers' protest when the Conservatives were in power. Farmers then felt, very left out about net zero targets, about fertiliser costs, about red tape, bureaucracy, all the things actually that's in Clarkson's farm was offensive to farmers under the previous political regime. It's just that we've now got the inheritance burden on top. So it's not fair to say that this is just a Labour Party issue. I think farmers on the whole feel pretty left out across various governments. I hope I'm right in saying that.
Yeah,
but nevertheless, at the moment, the problem on the table is with the Labour Party. And do you think there are going to be a lot of Labour MPs out there looking at their margins, their majorities, and thinking, hang on a minute, I'm in a rural seat here, and I've just been kind of hung out to dry by the Chancellor and by the Prime Minister?
I've not heard anything, but it is fair to say that the electoral map has changed. And it's quite interesting because with the general election, there are now more Labour MPs and Liberal Democrat MPs that represent these rural seats. What they could say is that rural communities, much like the rest of the country, really does value public services. And there is a conversation to be had on how we fund those public services. But I've not heard anything on the ground in terms of what the MPs are actually saying from their constituents. OK, Jay-Z, and thank you very much. And also thank you very much to Clive and Henry Bailey. Hope you've enjoyed your time
And stick around, like, if you want to come back in the next hour, please come back in, or maybe you've had enough of a Zero GB News. But anyway, thank you for your time. Absolute legends, and well done, son. The Prime Minister answered your question. Must feel good, right? Well done, mate. Now, thousands of farmers take to the streets of London to protest the government's changes to inheritance tax. Jet Set Stormer is sunning himself in Brazil. And talking of which, we'll be crossing live there next. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Stephen Dixon, and thanks for joining us on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akweer, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, you didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and this is GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
We're talking about Gareth Southgate and his proposed Don. There's a lot of rumours going around saying he's going to get a knighthood. So people like Nana are saying to me, why?
Because he hasn't won anything, has he? Look, I'm not a big fan of football. I watch England and the big matches, but he hasn't won anything. I mean, like, he hasn't actually won anything. He'll be following in the footsteps of people like Sir Alf Ramsey, Sir Bobby Robson, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
What has Gareth Southgate actually won?
Right, don't ask me. Let's ask our guests on this. So, has he truly earned the right to do this? Should all England managers, should you become an England manager and then get a knighthood as a result, or is that devaluing the honour? There you see on your screen to debate this, Harry Harris, top football writer, and royal commentator Angela Levin. She knows a thing or two about all of this. Angela, what do you think?
I think absolutely not. I mean, I know he's a good example to people, but he's a sort of almost. He's almost done this. He's almost won that. You can't have someone to have a knighthood if you're an almost. You can't. This is someone who does the most amazing things. This is a hero. This is a serviceman. It's not somebody who does really kindly and looks after his people, and it's just not fun. I think it just diminishes the whole thing of giving people such a high level of gratitude.
GB News, the People's Channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
I'm Isabel Webster. Thanks for joining us on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Time is 3:26. I'm Martin Daubney here on GB News. Now, meanwhile, as farmers fume in their freezing fields, the Prime Minister is living La Vida Loca. He's 6,000 miles away in subtropical Rio at the G20 summit. And our political editor, Chris Hope, spoke with him at length earlier on today. Chris, you join us now from Rio. Tell us, you spoke to Keir Starmer today. Obviously, the mood back in Britain is considerably frostier than the weather where you are in subtropical Rio. Tell us more.
Hi, Martin. Yeah, welcome to 29 degrees here, very, very hot for Sir Keir Starmer at the G20 summit, of course. We've asked him here about these missiles being fired from Ukraine into Russia. Is there a risk of World War III? What will you do to prevent that? Will you allow UK missiles to be fired there? He wouldn't give us an answer on that. But all eyes and the team around here in Westminster, in Rio G $20 are looking back in London and those vast numbers of farmers protesting. I asked a question you heard there from your farming guest there of the Prime Minister, but I asked him, challenged him about whether he felt his party was too urban to understand the concerns of so many farming communities, and he gave an interesting answer. Let's hear what he had to say.
Very important for me to keep making the case that it's only farms and assets over £3 million in a typical case of parents wanting to pass on to their children, and therefore for that reason I'm confident that the vast majority of farms will not be affected. But look, I understand concerns. We must have discussions. The Minister was in discussions yesterday with the farmers, and we'll continue to do so.
So will you tweak
the
threshold, or will you allow over 80s not to be hit by it because they can't plan for their inheritance?
Well, because the threshold is high, the vast majority are unaffected. The other thing I would say is this. I mean, I grew up in a rural area. I know firsthand that rural areas, farming communities, they do need the investment that we put in the budget into their hospitals, into their schools, into housing near where they are so their families can live.
Yeah. There you have it. Sir Keir Starmer there saying he grew up in a farming community. He went on to say in that interview, Martin, my first job was on a farm, he told me. I grew up in the countryside, he said. All of my entire family live in the countryside, he said. We are a rural family. I'm the only one who lives in a city. Now that's surprising. Those of us who know Sir Keir Starmer's life story, we know he's the son of a toolmaker, but no one had quite grasped the extent to which he relies on his rural roots. But despite all that, despite him donning the flat cap, being dubbed Farmer Starmer on social media as people have reacted to the GB News interview today, he's not going to do anything to help them. He's going to not try and move in and try and remove the scale of that IHT bill for so many. He says it's 3 million if you include other relief. So right now, Sir Keir Starmer here in Rio is digging his heels in, Martin.
And thank you very much, Chris Oak, for asking the son of a toolmaker that question from the son of a farmer here, Clive Bailey's son, Henry. Thank you very, very much. We just had Henry in the studio. You absolutely made his year, so thank you very, very much there. Our man in Rio, Chris Hope, thank you very, very much. And let's get back to the studio and get a bit of reaction from Jade Azim. Jade, is it fair to say that it would be better if Sir Keir Starmer was in Britain? The G20 obviously was penciled in a long time ago, but is there a feeling that while he's sunning himself in Rio, you know, things are being particularly politically frosty for him back here in Britain?
The nature of this is that the G20 summit would have been in the diary for many months, whereas the nature of protests is that they're scheduled with weeks, if not days. Right. And the second point is that I don't think Number 10 or anyone could have foreseen just how significant the international turmoil was going to be this early on in his premiership. We just had the re-election of Donald Trump. I think it is imperative that the Prime Minister has to be on the world stage whilst his ministers are at home.
And do you think the revelation here, we know it became a bit of a trope of the election that Sir Keir Starmer was the son of a toolmaker. There were tribes in the Amazon that must have known Sir Keir Starmer was the son of a toolmaker. Now the revelation, he worked on a farm. He was a farmhand, Farmer Starmer. Might that become another meme or trope?
Depends on the message discipline coming from the party, I suppose. Politicians always intending to try and look human, you know, they're sort of forced into that position to do so. But actually, they are trying to stick by the objective facts and numbers, and I think that's probably the strongest case.
Super. Thanks for your insight. Please stick around for the rest of the hour. Jade Azim, former Labour Party advisor. Great start to the show. Now, still loads more to come between now and 4 o'clock, including we'll cross back to farmers who are furious about the inheritance tax changes, and they say it could spell the end of family farming. But first, here's your latest news headlines, and here's Sophie Reaper.
A very good afternoon to you. Let's take a look at your headlines for this hour. Farming leaders have accused the Chancellor of refusing to engage with them over controversial changes to inheritance tax. That's as thousands of farmers have marched on Westminster. First unveiled in Rachel Reeves' budget, the plans to impose inheritance tax on farms worth more than £1 million have sparked fury among rural communities. The president of the National Farmers Union says Labour has destroyed a contract between farming and the government dating back to the Second World War with the changes they've made to inheritance tax. However, Environment Secretary Steve Reid says due to inheriting a £22 million black hole from the previous government, Labour had no choice.
This government's commitment to farming and to farmers is absolute. That's why we've allocated £5 billion to farming in the budget. That's the biggest amount of money in our country's history for sustainable food production. But we have to plug that £22 billion black hole in our public finances, otherwise we can't fix our public services like the broken National Health Service. So it's only right that we've had to ask the wealthiest landowners and the biggest farms to pay their fair share. But I would emphasise only around 500 farms will be affected. The vast majority of farmers will pay no more under the new scheme than they do under the current one.
Also at the protests earlier today, TV presenter and farm owner Jeremy Clarkson said Rachel Reeves has used a blunderbuss to hit farmers.
If she'd have wanted to take out the likes of James Dyson and investment bankers and so on, she would have used a sniper's rifle. But she's used a blunderbuss and she's hit all this lot. It was, as I understand it, it was a very rushed last-minute decision. And I think, you know, we all make mistakes in life, and I think it's time for them to say, you know what, we've cocked this one up a bit and back down. That's my...
Elsewhere, almost 200 schools have closed in England and Wales, and new weather warnings have been issued as snow hits parts of the UK. Thousands of train passengers are suffering disruption due to the severe weather. By 11 this morning, around 64 out of a total 120 services planned by East Midlands Railway were reportedly cancelled or delayed by at least 30 minutes. There are currently 3 yellow warnings in place for snow and ice in northern Scotland, northern England and parts of Northern Ireland, the Midlands and North East Wales. Those are your latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Sophie Reaper. More from me in the next half an hour.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
But first, here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2651 and €1.1951. The price of gold is £2,080.21 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 8,070 points, set for 7 points.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hello again. Here's your latest GB News weather forecast brought to you by the Met Office. A lot of cold weather around at the moment. Yes, sunny skies for some of us too, but also quite a few sleet and snow showers. Pushing in on a brisk northerly wind, and it's on this northerly wind that we're also dragging in that cold Arctic air, which is why temperatures are so far below average for the time of year. As we go through the rest of today, we will see a bit more cloud, a few outbreaks of rain across the far south clearing away, and then a lot of dry, clear weather for many of us, but plenty of wintry showers across parts exposed to that brisk northerly wind, so northern parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland, down the western side of Wales and also down the eastern part of the country too. Some very low temperatures with clear skies tonight. We are going to wake up to a harsh frost. The lowest temperatures will be across parts of Scotland. Last night it fell to -11. It could be even colder than that tonight, especially in places where there's some lying snow. Also watch out for some icy patches, especially where there are wintry showers. Also watch out for icy patches and some snow accumulations over parts of Northern Ireland. Mostly dry for inland areas, but both towards western and eastern fringes there will be the risk of some wintry showers, and these could cause some problems as we go through morning rush hour. Otherwise, as we go through tomorrow, we will continue to see some showers piling down on that relatively strong northerly wind. Most inland areas will avoid the showers, though they will penetrate quite far inland at times because of the brisk wind. That brisk wind is also going to make it feel pretty cold. These temperatures are well below average for the time of year. Even though there will be quite a bit of sunshine around, it really is going to feel quite raw. Little change as we go through the evening and overnight Wednesday into Thursday. Again, another cold, widely frosty night for many of us, and still some wintry showers to watch out for. Chance of some unsettled weather in the southwest on Thursday, and then by the weekend, things could be very wet and windy indeed. Bye-bye.
The latest GB News travel. Good afternoon, I'm Jules Buckley. Some road closures in the north of Scotland. Firstly, in the Highlands, the A86 is closed by Lagan Church, a two-vehicle collision there. In Fochabers in Murray, the A96 is closed from the A98 at the Fochabers East roundabout to the B9104, a collision there as well. If you're heading towards Ballinluig, if you're heading for the A9 in Perth and Kinross, that's closed to and queuing from multi-vehicle collision. Now, the Woodhead Road in Derbyshire between Crowden and Holmfirth closed for snow. A49 between Wellington and Hope under Dinmore closed for investigation work. M4 eastbound the Prince of Wales Bridge back open, still queuing following emergency repairs, and very slow around Westminster in Whitehall, all due to the farmers' protest this afternoon there. And for now, that's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Welcome back. Time is 3:48. I'm Martin Daubney here on GB News. Now, in protest that planned changes to inheritance tax rules, farmers across the country have been protesting today in Westminster to try and force the government to change course, accusing Sir Keir Starmer's administration of betraying them. But the Environment Secretary Steve Reid defended the government's position.
Well, we inherited a £22 billion black hole from the previous government, and the previous Chancellor of the Exchequer covered the scale of that problem up. So none of us knew how difficult the problem would be when we were coming into government. But this government's commitment to farming and to farmers is absolute. That's why we've allocated £5 billion to farming in the budget. That's the biggest amount of money in our country's history for sustainable food production. But we have to plug that £22 billion black hole in our public finances. Otherwise, we can't fix our public services like the broken National Health Service. So it's only right that we've had to ask the wealthiest landowners and the biggest farms to pay their fair share. But I would emphasise only around 500 farms will be affected. The vast majority of farmers will pay no more under the new scheme than they do under the current one.
Steve Reid there, sticking to the party line. Let's cross back to Westminster now and speak to GB News reporter Adam Cherry. Adam, you've been out there in the cold and the rain. Looks a bit brighter now. Tell us, what's the mood on the ground as the crowds begin to dissipate back to the provinces?
That's right, Martin. I'm here on Parliament Square in the cold. You're there in that lovely warm studio. I don't know how that's happened. But anyway, I'm joined by Andrew Meredith, who is the editor of Farmers Weekly. Andrew, thank you for joining us. Today's a huge event, thousands of people. Can you just tell us a little bit about why it was important for you and your readers to be here today?
Well, this is the number one issue, obviously, since the budget that our readers have been talking about. They're really worried about it. And I think what's been incredible for us to watch is this unifying moment that has come over the sector. So many issues are devolved or divided by farming sector. We're not that unified in industry as people think, looking from the outside in, but this is something that everybody cares about, everybody has an opinion on, and we're here, obviously, like you guys are, to let them know what's going on.
We just heard from the Environment Secretary Steve Reid, and he was saying that this is necessary, this inheritance tax change, to plug the hole in the public finances at £22 billion. Do you think that your readers, the farming community, will buy that, or is that falling on deaf ears, really?
I think farmers, like a lot of people, recognise that the public finances are in a difficult condition. I think they recognise in particular that health spending and defence spending is something that is of significant concern, and they weren't too happy with the last government either, but they would really question whether farming can continue to carry any additional loads. Can more be sliced off of a sector that's already operating on wafer-thin margins? And most of our readers would say absolutely not.
What do you think happens next? So what's your message to the government? And are you hoping for some leeway on this, perhaps a bit of a U-turn?
I think politically it's very difficult for the government to change, given that they didn't change on winter fuel payments. So I think they will feel that they have to dig in here. But as well as the emotion of today, actually the National Farmers Union, the organisers of the rally, they've got some very technical arguments about how farmers have been pulled into the scope of this in seemingly to a much greater extent than the Treasury perhaps first intended. So conversations, a lot of them have happened today, but people are wanting to make very clear, lobbyists and farmers, that this is just the beginning, not the end. So there's going to be a lot more pressure applied on backbench MPs, on members of the cabinet. I think it's obviously an issue that's got all the way up to Keir Starmer, even in Rio de Janeiro today. So we'll see.
Absolutely. We'll see indeed. Andrew Meredith, thank you very much for joining us on GB News. Martin, back to you in that very warm studio. As you heard there, a huge issue here. This isn't the last you'll hear of this, I don't think.
I've served my time out in the cold, Adam. I'm putting my feet up now. Thank you very, very much, Adam Cherry and Andrew Meredith. Absolute pleasure. Thank you. And I'm joined in this lovely warm studio now by the Liberal Democrat MP for North Norfolk, Steph Aquarone. Steph, welcome to the studio.
Thank you.
Wonderful to meet you in person. Tell us about the importance of farming to the Liberal Democrats and what your take was on today's proceedings.
Well, I was just delighted to see how many people turned up in London today to make their voices heard. I think it's quite clear to me as a Lib Dem MP representing a farming community that, let's face it, the Conservative Party stopped caring about farmers several years ago. The Labour Party aren't listening. The reason that I know that this is such an important issue to my constituents is that we go out and we talk to people day in, day out. We talk to people on the ground, and that's why these numbers that keep coming out of government about how few farms are going to be affected are just baloney.
So what kind of numbers are you hearing? Because we keep hearing it'll only be 500 farms in all of Britain. For example, in your constituency alone, how many farmers or farms may be impacted?
I would say that of the farmers that I know, which is now most of them in some way or other, the farmers that farm for food, 75, 80%, maybe more of them are going to be impacted directly by this policy.
And that's what the NFU are basically saying. So,
absolutely.
Is this a case of the government getting their figures wrong, or are they just miscalculated in some way?
I think probably both. I've learned to recognise that a lot of stuff that might look like conspiracy is actually just incompetence sometimes. And when I heard Daniel Zeichner, the farming minister, the Secretary of State for DEFRA, defend this stuff in the House, he didn't look wholly convinced. He was trying his best. But this is a guy who I think was welcomed by the farming community, seen as somebody who gets it, and I don't doubt that he does. It must have been excruciating for him having to defend something which I'm guessing he probably only found out about a couple of hours before he had to talk about it and defend it.
And Steph, I think a bit like the winter fuel allowance, we're contacted by viewers all the time saying, if you're going to go after the wealthiest, fine, we're on that journey with you. If it's only those massive landholders, British Airways, for example, hoovering up land to plant trees to offset their carbon footprint. If you are going to means test it, as with the winter fuel allowance, then I'll go on that journey with you. But there's a feeling that those family farmers, in the same way as those pensioners just about on the cusp of getting the winter fuel allowance, is sucking people into the bracket and it's making victims of them when actually they should just be going after the richest, and then actually the public might agree with them.
I think that's right. I think that nobody, certainly in my party, is suggesting we shouldn't apply taxation in order to collect money. And clearly people who are rich should pay more, but it's that cusp. It's those people that are going to be forced either out of business or to sell parts of their business. And you might say, oh, well, who cares? But it matters uniquely in farming because it's part of our way of life in our communities, but it's also what puts food on our table. And if farmers are forced to have to sell land, I know who's going to buy it. It will be the wealthy foreign pension funds and people who are still going to land bank it in order to avoid inheritance tax and invest in assets. And that's not going to put food on our table.
Steph Aquarone, thank you very much for joining us in the studio. It's a pleasure to have your company. That's the Liberal Democrat MP for North Norfolk. Thank you very much for joining us in the studio. Now, it's not just the farmers that are unhappy, as millions of pensioners are bracing for an especially harsh winter as their winter fuel payments are slashed. Does this signal the start of a long winter of discontent for the Labour Party? That's next. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's News Channel.
Dubes & Co. Weekdays from 6 p.m.
This is a topic very close to my heart. I have become fully convinced that social media, smartphones are one of the primary causes of mental health problems in children and many other serious problems beside. Lots of governments are starting to talk about this, but the Australians are well ahead in their use of legislation. What do you think about this issue?
Well, I think you're right. I mean, I've got 3 young children and I'm really concerned about... I mean, they're too young to be on social media, but I'm really concerned about what lies ahead for them. I'm not sure I support what Australia's doing, not because I don't think it's a good idea to ensure that age verification is right. I'm just not sure that the age 16 is appropriate. But that's progress. If we effectively, as I do, accept the point that we need some sort of control, then we can move to a proper debate about whether that's 16, 14, 13, whatever it may be. And of course, there are age restrictions on things like Facebook. I think from memory it is 13.
Yes, but it's a tick box.
But it's a tick box. So all you can do is you can just knock. If you're 11 years old, you can just predate your date of birth by 2 years, and you can get on. I think what Australia is proposing is interesting because it will stop young people, maybe without their parents' knowledge, short-circuiting the system because they're going to be asking for proper age verification and ID. That's definitely something we should do in the UK because it's enforced in the existing law. Query, is 16 the right age, Miriam?
I completely agree with it. It's something I actually said should have been done before. And I think what is good about it is that for a long time, a lot of governments have been saying that the actual social media companies should take more responsibility, but they're not going to because it hurts their bottom line. The most voracious users are younger users. So they will pledge that, oh, I'll put the tick box in, but the kid is the one who's going to actually tick the box. So doing something like this is saying that, OK, we will put in legislation that damages your bottom line. And I think it will force the hand because they've said it's only 12 months and they will reevaluate it.
GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Join me, Nana Akweer, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 10 to 4. I'm Martin Daubney here on GB News. Now, the UK is being warned to brace for a further cold snap, with disruptive snow set to sweep in across parts of the country as temperatures continue to plummet. And millions of pensioners are bracing for an especially harsh winter this year as their energy bills, of course, are set to rise while winter fuel payments have been slashed. Well, joining me now to discuss this is the founder of thepensionervote.com, David Pinless. David, welcome to the show. I spoke to you earlier on, and I know you're snowed in there in Wales. Graphic evidence of the snow dropping, the mercury plummeting, and of course, that brings into fresh relief the conversation we've been having since that budget about the winter fuel allowance and the increasing concerns of British pensioners. Can you tell me what you've been hearing from your extensive membership now? How concerned are British pensioners getting as the temperatures continue to plummet?
Well, good afternoon, Martin. Thank you for having me. As you can see, I'm sitting here with actually a fisherman's sweater on rather than a farmer's sweater. And outside, it's been snowing and the roads are pretty blocked up. And we've been hearing from our members about the problems they're experiencing. One profound comment which I received was that we don't need to have a new assisted dying bill in Parliament because one was introduced in the budget. It was called scrapping the winter fuel payment. This is a depth of anger that pensioners have. And here in rural North Wales, we have a lot of pensioners and also a lot of farmers. So the two stories are in fact colliding. If I can just digress and tell you something about farmers, because it's quite relevant. I have a farmer friend who is currently in hospital, in a cancer hospital. He has leukemia. And he contracted the leukemia almost certainly because he was using a sheep dip that contained chemicals that caused the leukemia. And in fact, these chemicals were perfectly acceptable at the time they were being used, but they have since been banned. And so he is suffering there, and he feels he's being deceived by the government that his farm is almost certainly going to have to be sold, possibly, to pay inheritance tax. So we're cheating farmers and we're cheating pensioners. Now, energy prices are going up, but food prices are also going to be going up very soon, as the supermarkets are going to have to pay a higher payroll tax in the form of employers' national insurance. So whichever way you look at it, farmers and pensioners are two of the demographics that are going to be deeply affected by the government's current policies. And one certainly has a sense, well, I certainly have a sense that the people sitting around the cabinet table are almost designing these policies around a dinner table and have never set foot in a farm and know very little about rural communities.
And David, I think we have a video of the centres earlier on of the deep snow in North Wales. We can get that up on screen now, and perhaps we can continue to talk over that. Before, we looked at the political map of what the winter fuel allowance did. Of course, it was only Labour Party MPs who voted to axe the winter fuel allowance, and there are a great many pensioners in some of those seats with not many very big margins. And is there a particular rural element to that? Are there any seats that leap out, rural seats with a lot of pensioners with small Labour majorities that could be feeling a bit nervous about their position right now?
Well, quite frankly, the constituency in which I currently live, which is Montgomeryshire and Glendower, I can't remember the exact numbers, but that's a seat that is at risk. And if I can just point out the big disconnect that we have between the government and the pensioners and the farmers. If you go to thepensionervote.com and look at the article called Age Champions, 17 of the Labour MPs who voted to scrap the winter fuel allowance claim to be age champions. And I wrote to all 17 of them asking how they can reconcile that with scrapping the winter fuel payment. I didn't receive one single reply.
OK, David Pinless, we have to leave it there. Thank you very much. That's the founder of thepensionervote.com. Thank you very much. Always a pleasure. You stay warm and you stay safe out there. Now, the Prime Minister has previously said stabilising our economy is the first step of this long-term plan. And the only way we keep prices low, cut NHS waiting lists and secure the triple lock so that every pensioner in this country, every pensioner will be better off with Labour. We'll be going back to the streets of London soon to hear from more farmers. Are they happy or not? I'm Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, your weather with Alex Burkill.
Expect a warm front, moving from the kitchen right through to the rest of the house. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again. Here's your latest GB News weather forecast brought to you by the Met Office. A lot of cold weather around at the moment. Yes, sunny skies for some of us too, but also quite a few sleet and snow showers. Pushing in on a brisk northerly wind, and it's on this northerly wind that we're also dragging in that cold Arctic air, which is why temperatures are so far below average for the time of year. As we go through the rest of today, we will see a bit more cloud, a few outbreaks of rain across the far south clearing away, and then a lot of dry, clear weather for many of us, but plenty of wintry showers across parts exposed to that brisk northerly wind, so northern parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland, down the western side of Wales and also down the eastern part of the country too. Some very low temperatures with clear skies tonight. We are going to wake up to a harsh frost. The lowest temperatures will be across parts of Scotland. Last night it fell to -11. It could be even colder than that tonight, especially in places where there's some lying snow. Also watch out for some icy patches, especially where there are wintry showers. Also watch out for icy patches and some snow accumulations over parts of Northern Ireland. Mostly dry for inland areas, but both towards western and eastern fringes there will be the risk of some wintry showers, and these could cause some problems as we go through morning rush hour. Otherwise, as we go through tomorrow, we will continue to see some showers piling down on that relatively strong northerly wind. Most inland areas will avoid the showers, though they will penetrate quite far inland at times because of the brisk wind. That brisk wind is also going to make it feel pretty cold. These temperatures are well below average for the time of year. Even though there will be quite a bit of sunshine around, it really is going to feel quite raw. Little change as we go through the evening and overnight Wednesday into Thursday. Again, another cold, widely frosty night for many of us, and still some wintry showers to watch out for. Chance of some unsettled weather in the southwest on Thursday, and then by the weekend, things could be very wet and windy indeed. Bye-bye.
A nice bright morning will generate a lovely warm day, right through to the evening. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, hello, I'm Jules Buckley. Issues in Glasgow. The southbound M74's queuing down towards the M73. That's junction 3 to 4. A collision there means slow going and partially blocked. Now, just near the North Seaton roundabout in Ashington in Northumberland, the A189 is closed between that roundabout and the A197. A collision there causing delays. Great Glen in Leicestershire, the Leicester Road eastbound, the A6 closed from the Archers roundabout through towards the Burton Overy turnoff. There's a police incident. A49 between Hope under Dinmore and Wellington closed and queuing for a two-car collision. Clockwise M25 traffic being held. Reigate at 8, Leatherhead at 9 queuing for a medical emergency. And the southbound side of Whitehall in Westminster closed for the farmers' protest, still causing big queues.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
This is the final week to grab your chance to win Christmas on Us this year. There's £20,025 in tax-free cash. There's £5,000 to spend on gifts for all the family. There's £500 to spend in your favourite supermarket. And a festively themed GB News goodie bag. We'll get it all to you in time for the big day. For another chance to win, call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2, or post your name and number to GB09 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 22nd of November. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
A very, very good afternoon to you. It's 4 p.m. and welcome to the Martin Daubney Show here on GB News. We're broadcasting live from the heart of Westminster and all across the UK. On today's show, Westminster was a sea of woolly hats and wellies earlier on today as over 10,000 British farmers gathered to roar a message of defiance to our government. Jeremy Clarkson bellowed back down. The NFU president demanded a sit-down with the reluctant Rachel Reeves. And throughout today's show, I'll be joined in the GB News studio by key leaders, activists and farmers themselves who are standing together crying, enough is enough. No farmers, no food. And meanwhile, as farmers fume in their freezing fields, our Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, well, he's living La Vida Loca. He's 6,000 miles away in subtropical Rio at the G20 summit. But he says he gets it, as he told GB News earlier today that his first job was on a farm. We'll hear from the Prime Minister, of course, live at 5 p.m. And with farming on its knees, pensioners feeding the freeze and council tax going through the roof, is it any wonder that gin and tonic has replaced the Great British Cup of Tea as the nation's favourite bevy? A raisin ice and a slice to the simply gin-credible tipple later in the show. That's all coming in next hour. Welcome to the show. Always a pleasure to have your company. Back down. Admit you got it wrong. Admit you made a mistake. Those were the words of Jeremy Clarkson earlier on today at Westminster, speaking to a huge crowd of 10,000 plus farmers. We had some of those in the studio in the last hour, all saying they feel the government is completely out of touch with their needs. 500 farms, Rachel Reeves say, is a small number that will be impacted. But farmers are saying, what planet are you on? It'll be many, many more farms than that. And they were in London today crying, enough is enough. What do you make of their last valid stand? Don't forget, the farmers protested back in March when the Conservatives were in power. So it's not just this government that farmers feel abandoned by, it's perhaps successive ones. Get in touch. gbnews.com/your say is the way to do it. But now here's your headlines, and it's Sophie Reaper.
A very good afternoon to you. We'll start this hour with some breaking news. Northamptonshire police have confirmed that 24-year-old Harshita Bella, who was found murdered in East London last week, was killed by strangulation. Officers attended her address following concerns for her welfare last Wednesday, leading to her body being located in the boot of a car in the Ilford area of London. Police are still searching for her husband, whom they have said is suspected of killing Harshita and then fleeing the country. Elsewhere, farming leaders have accused the Chancellor of refusing to engage with them over controversial changes to inheritance tax. That's as thousands of farmers have marched on Westminster today. First unveiled in Rachel Reeves' budget, the plans to impose inheritance tax on farms worth more than £1 million have sparked fury among rural communities. However, Environment Secretary Steve Reid says due to inheriting a £22 million black hole from the previous government, Labour had no choice.
This government's commitment to farming and to farmers is absolute. That's why we've allocated £5 billion to farming in the budget. That's the biggest amount of money in our country's history for sustainable food production. But we have to plug that £22 billion black hole in our public finances, otherwise we can't fix our public services like the broken National Health Service. So it's only right that we've had to ask the wealthiest landowners and the biggest farms to pay their fair share. But I would emphasise only around 500 farms will be affected. The vast majority of farmers will pay no more under the new scheme than they do under the current one.
Also speaking at the protests in Westminster, Shadow Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, Victoria Atkins, says the impact on farmers will be huge.
The real-life impacts of this are enormous because we know already around kitchen tables in farms up and down the country, farmers have got advice from their accountants, from their business advisors, and they are deeply, deeply worried and distressed that if older members of the family live past March 2026 when this change comes in, then they are faced with an enormous inheritance tax bill when that dear beloved relative passes on. And when I say, huge bills, we're talking hundreds of thousands of pounds, possibly even over £1 million.
Russia says Ukraine has fired US-supplied long-range missiles into the country for the first time today. The Ministry of Defence in Moscow says Ukraine used the Army tactical missile system in a strike on Russia's Bryansk region this morning, although Ukraine is yet to comment. Now, Russia also says it's changed its nuclear policy as Moscow signals anger over the US missile decision. Downing Street responded today, saying Putin's decision to raise the issue of nuclear weapons again is, quote, the latest example of his irresponsibility from the, quote, depraved Russian government. Meanwhile, Defence Minister Luke Pollard has also visited the training centre for Operation Interflex today. The operation is the UK's Armed Forces programme, which has helped train 50,000 Ukrainian troops since Russia's invasion began in 2022. Mr Pollard says that the UK will continue to support Ukraine with programmes like this for as long as it takes.
Well, the situation in Ukraine is very serious. Russian aggression against the Ukrainian people is not only targeting Ukrainian troops on the front line, but targeting energy and critical national infrastructure as winter approaches. There's one person who could stop this war. There's one person who could stop the escalation and could stop the attacks on civilians. That one person is President Putin. At every stage, it is Russia that has escalated. But our support for Ukraine is undimmed. We're doubling down on our support with more military equipment and kit and training going to Ukraine, and we'll continue to do that for as long as it takes.
In weather, almost 200 schools have closed in England and Wales, and new weather warnings have been issued as snow has hit parts of the UK. In travel, thousands of train passengers are suffering disruption due to severe weather. By 11 this morning, around 64 out of a total of 120 services planned by East Midlands Railway were reportedly cancelled or delayed by at least 30 minutes. There are currently 3 yellow warnings in place for snow and ice in northern Scotland, northern England and parts of Northern Ireland, the Midlands and North East Wales. For now, those are your latest GB News headlines. I'm Sophie Reaper. More from me in the next half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you, Sophie. Now, Westminster was a sea of woolly hats and wellies today as over 10,000 British farmers gathered to roar a message of defiance to the government. Now, earlier on, Jeremy Clarkson urged the Labour Party to abandon its inheritance tax raid as there is very little money in farming.
I do want to finish, if I may, with a message to the government. I do. Not a shouty one, it's this. For the sake of everybody here, and for all the farmers who are stuck at home today, paralysed by a fog of despair over what's been foisted upon them, I beg of the government to be big, to accept that this was rushed through, it wasn't thought out, and it's a mistake. That's the big thing to do, admit it, and back down. Thank you, everybody.
Now, while I was at it, he wasn't best pleased with the BBC. He branded them the mouthpiece of this infernal government. And here he is earlier on, giving both barrels to BBC presenter Victoria Derbyshire.
Why are you here, Mr Clarkson?
Well, because I'm here to support farmers.
Right. Are you angry?
It's difficult to be angry on somebody else's behalf. That's like being... Yes, no, I'm not angry on someone else's behalf.
Right. So it's not about you. It's not about your farm and the fact that you bought a farm to avoid inheritance tax.
Classic BBC there. Classic. Oh, yeah. It's not the fact that I bought a farm to avoid inheritance tax. The fact.
There you go, that is Clarkson speaking truth to his former employers. And let's go live now to Westminster outside and speak to GB News reporter Adam Cherry. Adam, you're still out there in the cold. I hope it's not drizzling. Tell me, what's the latest mood on the ground?
Yeah, Martin, the weather's great out here. We're feeling good. And I'm joined by Cameron Kinch, who's a young farmer. Cameron, thanks for joining us on GB News. First of all, just tell us a little bit about you, your farm, and why you're here today.
Yeah, so I farm down in Somerset near Taunton, with Dad still being on the farm, very much so, and there's even Grandad still there. You know, it's a proper family farm. We do arable, you know, normal cereal crops, and we do quite a lot of stewardship on our farm as well. Got fair amount of sort of conservation work and tree planting and whatnot.
What does today mean for the farming community? How important was it to be here today?
Well, it's important to show the government that we are, you know, the government are using botched figures and are saying farmers won't be affected by this. Look, there's 20,000 people out there. Yep. Farmers are, they're not losing days of work. You know, I've got things to do on the farm. My old man and mum said, oh, we'll take the slack, you've got to be there. Yeah, they're not losing days of work because they're not going to be affected. They know their finances. They know that when their parents die, they're going to be hit with a tax bill that they can't pay. The profits you make from the farm are none to very little to making a loss. There's no money to be made in farming, realistically, but we do have assets. We are, you know, we're cash poor, asset rich, famously. And the government want to take away our assets, which is going to stop us farming and stop generations from farming.
Yeah, so we heard from the Environment Secretary, Steve Reed, earlier today, and he, like most of the government, sort of towing the party line and saying only a very small percentage of the farmers will be affected. But you're saying those figures are wrong, and is that the feeling amongst everyone else here today? That was the impression you got?
Well, of course they're wrong. He's using figures that take into account pony paddocks and people that just have a field in their back garden, which is perfectly valid, but don't use them in the sense that, you know, you have family farms, viable farms, which are getting put together with these sort of pony paddocks and whatnot, and they're using those figures, whereas the farmers that actually have a business out of it and trying to make money and trying to feed the nation, they're the farms that are going to be kept taken away. You know, the pony paddocks, the 1 million threshold is 40 acres and a nice house. That's what's being protected. That's what the government's protecting here. So they're not protecting viable family farms. They're going to destroy them.
So finally, if you had Keir Starmer and Steve Reed standing here in front of us today, what would your message to them be?
Well, I'd just say, considering Mrs. Reeves, the amount of money you're raising from this, which isn't an awful lot in the grand scheme of your whole budget, is it worth it? Is it worth the human cost? Is it worth our cost to our heritage, cost to the environment? The environment. Look, we plan well in the future to keep it in for generations. Big corporates that would take over the land won't care about that.
Cameron, thank you very much for joining us today.
Pleasure.
Martin, back to you in that warm studio. As you heard from Cameron, real strength of feeling here. I was here as well. Raucous crowd, well over 20,000 people. Let's hope the government were listening.
Thank you very much to Adam Cherry and also to Cameron, who was in the studio with me earlier on. Now, for more reactions to today's events, I'm joined now by the columnist at The Observer, Will Hutton. Will, welcome to the show. You wrote a piece at the weekend, fair to say, put the cat amongst the pigeons. The headline was, "Farmers have hoarded land for too long. Inheritance tax will bring new life to rural Britain." Explain what you meant by that.
Yes, I mean, well, first of all, I mean, there are two things to say. I mean, I do get it that actually, as your interviewee was just saying, that farm turnover, farm profits, making a living is extremely difficult on many farms in Britain at the minute, and that is, we need to put that right. I mean, the chief reason for that, of course, as farmers honestly recognise when you talk to them privately, if not publicly, is we haven't replaced the structures of the common agricultural policy when we were in the European Union. I mean, we came out okay, but I mean, the CAP delivered very good revenue streams for British farming, and we haven't reproduced it. We've let them down. And so that needs to be fixed. That doesn't mean that you independently have to say, well, a principle like inheritance tax should be abandoned for farming because you've got that policy wrong over there. I'm in favour of inheritance tax. I don't call it a death tax like some Americans do. I call it a life tax. We share, as a society, only a small part, actually. I mean, even the 20% with £1 million and more than that, actually, in some circumstances, up to £3 million of tax-free allowance. So it's only a small amount of the transfer between the generations. And we do that because we're sharing in the good fortune of a very expensive asset changing hands between the generations. And I can't have a country in Europe who doesn't have a system like that. And of course, countries have been doing that, kind of for millennia, and society have been doing it for millennia. Done in the Roman Empire, actually. So,
Will, can I just interject? Can I please just interject? Your article has ruffled a few feathers. Elon Musk, in fact, retweeted it. He said Britain has gone full Stalin. It's had now over 37 million hits. He's talking, of course, about the fact that to him and to many people who read your piece, it sounds like the forced redistribution of land, collectivism, as it was known, because the comment you made in your article, young farmers will be able to afford to buy land, simply doesn't seem to match the reality. What I've been hearing from farmers, unions, farmers themselves, and thousands of farmers who are saying that won't happen. The land won't be split up so young people can afford to buy it. It'll be hoovered up by the big landowners. It'll be hoovered up by people like British Airways who want to plant trees to offset their carbon footprint. The idea that breaking up land will allow young farmers back into the industry is for the birds.
Well, I don't know about you, but I believe in supply and demand, and the operation of markets. I also believe in, bringing some dynamic, innovative capitalism to rural England. I found, the Elon Musk thing was wild. Actually, I very much doubt whether he read the article, but if it falls out that if people at the extreme, if they haven't taxed land, if the allowances don't work for them, if they haven't gifted the land or whatever the circumstance, so they have to sell a small parcel of land, I'm not sure that that's going to be hoovered up by corporations in the manner in which you described. I mean, in the 40 years up to 1992, when this exemption was introduced, and by the way, right from the end of the war right up until 1992, farmers paid, like all of us, inheritance tax when they bequested their asset, and actually production rose, there was a lively two-way market in land, actually, in that time. And lots of young farmers got going. Some of the people who are kind of in their 50s and 60s in the NFU demonstrations today, got started then. Much harder now. Much harder now. And if you have a tax like inheritance tax, you accept the principle, it should apply to everybody, I think. Now, we are leaning over backwards to give concessions in the proposition. I mean, the rate won't be 40%; it'll be 20% if you have to pay no interest on it. And these big kind of exemptions of $1 million per adult who's bequesting the land, and then of course there's more tax-free buildings. So look, it's not the. I mean, I really do get it. I mean, some of these people coming up to London to protest, they wouldn't do it if they didn't feel passionate. And actually, I understand why they feel passionate. And I would like to make common cause in actually fixing a system of agriculture support and agricultural investment that turn around the fortunes of our farms. But let's not abandon the principle of inheritance tax.
OK, Will Hutton, we're going to have to leave it there. The columnist at The Observer, thank you very much. Now, joining me in the studio is one of the co-organisers of the Farmers' Rally and the social media star, Ollie Harrison. Ollie, I know you sort of get embarrassed about being called a social media star, but you have, it has to be said, become a kind of unlikely standard bearer of this movement, and you've been a big organiser. I don't know how much you could hear there of what Will Hutton was saying at The Observer, but basically he was saying that this is a good thing. Farmers have hoarded land for too long. Inheritance tax will bring new life to rural Britain, and what he's saying is, at last, the big landholders will have it all split up and young farmers will be able to get in and get involved in farming. I put the point to him, I don't think that's going to happen. It'll be hoovered up by huge conglomerates. You're a farmer, you know the truth. What's the reality?
First, let's look what land's used for. Growing food. If you're a wealthy landowner, shall we say, and you don't want to get your hands dirty, you rent that land to someone, and that's where tenant farmers come from. And I own some land, but equally, I'm a tenant as well. So saying that it's stopping young people getting into farming is false, because they get in and pay rent, and the rent has nothing to do with the value of the land. The returns on owning land are minuscule compared to putting that money in the bank. So if people want to go and put that money in the bank and earn 4.5%, 5% on it, that's what they could do. It's just crazy to think that people owning land is bad for the country. Imagine if the land did devalue so much. What would the banks do? Why do we want to devalue our country?
And do you feel that the political class have just completely misread the mood, got the room wrong here? Because they keep repeating, almost parrot-like now, they often do when they're in the corner, politicians, only 500 farms will be affected. This is fair.
Per year. The other thing that they're not saying is only 3.6% of the population pay inheritance tax. With these new rules, I've still not yet met a farmer in the last 3 weeks that wouldn't. So that means 100% of farmers will be paying inheritance tax. How is that fair? We are the only industry that are price takers, not price setters. And that is the difference for agriculture. It was brought in for a reason, because it was stifling food production. It was breaking farms up. The margins aren't there to pay these tax bills. They need to go to the top of the food chain, not the bottom.
Can I ask you about the mood today? It seemed quite convivial. It's like, there was an excitement to be together, to be heard, to have Jeremy Clarkson on the stage, and yet there is a pessimism, Ollie, that nothing will really change. Perhaps they won't listen. If that happens, what happens next?
Well, who knows? I mean, saying it's only going to affect 500 farmers, there was clearly more than 500 farmers there today.
Yeah.
So hopefully that's a message to government to think, maybe we do need to look at these figures again. We know they need to look at the figures again. DEFRA told them to look at the figures again, and it started some internal politics there. It takes a bigger man to admit they've got it wrong than to just be ignorant and carry on. Maybe they'll start to listen. Maybe they'll look at the figures. They'll realise that the returns aren't there. They'll realise how fragile the food supply chain is. And we can't afford to lose 500 farmers a year. The other thing is they try and hide behind the BPR and the APR. They're hiding behind APR. BPR is even bigger. That's every family business.
Explain to people what that is.
So APR is agricultural property relief. So that is basically your farmland and the farmhouse maybe.
Yep.
And BPR is business. That's like your tractors,
Yes.
your machinery, your livestock, your produce.
And that's often in itself supersedes £1 million mark.
Yeah, 2 tractors and a combine, there's your £1 million straight away. You know, most farms will have that. All the tenanted sector would have that because they won't have the asset that they'll use for the APR, but they'll have all the machinery or the livestock that they'd need BPR for in order for that business to carry on. You know, why should a business go bankrupt because someone's died? It just doesn't add up. Farming is not like any other industry. If it was, it'd be easy.
Are you optimistic that something good can come of this?
Well, you know, we've tried to be rational. There was an angry mob a week or two ago, and we've tried to manage that today.
You've done a great job of that. Well done.
You know, and we've brought everyone together to have their voices heard, and we just wait. A week or so, see what comes out of government. There's little things that they've been saying that might suggest that they are going to look at the figures again, but because they have such a massive majority, some of these MPs have never had a job, and now suddenly they think Keir Starmer's their boss. It's not. It's the constituents in their voters in their constituencies. They need to listen to them because they won't be there in 4 years.
Excellent stuff. I think we'll leave it at that. Ollie Harrison, thank you very much for joining us, and that's the co-organiser of today's Farmers Rally and the social media influencer who's been a huge player in this movement. Good lad, Ollie. Now, earlier on, the Environment Secretary Steve Reid was asked whether the government has betrayed farmers, and here's what he had to say.
Well, we inherited a £22 billion black hole from the previous government, and the previous Chancellor of the Exchequer covered the scale of that problem up. So none of us knew how difficult the problem would be when we were coming into government. But this government's commitment to farming and to farmers is absolute. That's why we've allocated £5 billion to farming in the budget. That's the biggest amount of money in our country's history for sustainable food production. But we have to plug that £22 billion black hole in our public finances. Otherwise, we can't fix our public services like the broken National Health Service. So it's only right that we've had to ask the wealthiest landowners and the biggest farms to pay their fair share. But I would emphasise only around 500 farms will be affected. The vast majority of farmers will pay no more under the new scheme than they do under the current one.
Steve Reid, earlier the Environment Secretary. Now, as thousands of farmers have taken to the streets of London to protest the government's changes to inheritance tax, Jet Set Starmer is setting himself in Brazil. We'll cross there to Rio next. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. This is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
Serving some of the most talked about food in Chelsea, Executive Head Chef of Number 50 Cheney, Ian Smith, has created a range of menus with a hint of the homeland, using the finest British ingredients sourced by trusted suppliers. Ian Smith was head chef at Jason Atherton's Social Eating House and spent time in the kitchens of the Galvin brothers. Ian joins me now to tell more of the story. Tell me about Number 50 Cheney.
Yes, so we are a beautiful restaurant down in a corner of Chelsea on the Embankment with an amazing team. And we are really pride ourselves on, being an affordable luxury that people, really are wanting to return to week in, week out.
What's the view from your restaurant?
Well, you can see the Embankment, the Thames, and Albert Bridge, which is very nice.
Very nice.
Actually lit up. Very romantic.
And tell me a little bit about your philosophy. I was talking there about having a touch of the homeland, British food, seasonal food.
Yes. Yeah, I think for me, great cooking is, with simplicity on finest ingredients, cooked with simplicity, and ultimately, there to be enjoyed through... Yeah, sorry.
No, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was going to say, it starts as a young person's business. You went into it very young, didn't you? 15?
Yes. Yeah, so I was 15. I sat in my parents' bedroom, called the Ritz, the Dorchester and Claridge's, and very luckily, a man on the end of the phone, 21 years ago, sent me on to a college course called the Specialised Chef Scholarship. 3 days later, I had a writ stamp letter through the post, and off me and my parents went, and luckily I got on the course.
And how old were you when you got your first responsibility, would you say?
I think the biggest responsibility in my career is today. Leading number 50 Cheney.
GB News, the People's Channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK.
We're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes. Thank you for joining us on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Your time is 4:28. I'm Martin Daubney here on GB News. Now, the Prime Minister was 6,000 miles away from today's farming protest here in Westminster. Instead, he was sitting himself in Brazil at the G20 World Leaders Summit. Keir Starmer says Ukraine is top of his agenda, but shouldn't he be looking a bit closer to home? Well, GB News' political editor Christopher Hope has been with him in Rio de Janeiro.
Vladimir Putin cannot be allowed to win this war, Sir Keir Starmer told GB News, as 6 long-range weapons fired from Ukraine into the heart of Russia. The question now is, what will the UK do? Will it sanction the use of its missiles to go into Russia? From the Prime Minister, no word on that here in Rio de Janeiro at the G20 summit. But all eyes for the team around Sir Keir Starmer are looking back at Westminster and those vast numbers of farmers protesting against the increase in inheritance tax on small farms. We heard earlier from Jeremy Clarkson, Kemi Badenoch, the Tory leader, of course, but now from Sir Keir Starmer, and he told GB News that he came from a family growing up in the farming area. He said his first job was on a farm. He said that his entire family live in the countryside. He said he gets it. He gets the concern the farmers have told GB News about over the past few days.
Is your party too urban? That's what Baroness Melius says. She's the Countryside Alliance president. That you don't really get the countryside. When were you last on a farm, for example?
My first job was on a farm, Jay. I grew up in the countryside. All of my entire family live in the countryside. We're a rural family. I'm the only one that lives in a city. I do get it, and that's why I'm able to say with confidence that threshold, for a typical case at £3 million, is a very high threshold. And therefore the vast majority of farmers will be unaffected.
But what will he do about it? Well, apparently nothing. Right now he's saying farmers have got to suck up this, deal with it. Everyone is paying more in tax across the country. Farmers are no different, he would say. And he wants to use the money paid coming from the removal of inheritance tax on family farms to pay for public services that they use. But frankly, how that goes down with farmers in a freezing cold Westminster from the boiling hot Rio de Janeiro, well, time will tell. Christopher Hope, GB News, Rio de Janeiro.
That's our man in Rio. Chris Hope getting all the best gigs. Here we are in London, but we're speaking to the farmers. It's been an epic show so far. There's lots more still to come between now and 5 o'clock, including, should our farmers be more militant? Well, the French have been dumping manure and blocking roads. I'll be joined by a French farmer next. See what they've got to say. But first, it's time for your headlines, and here's Sophie Reaper.
Thank you, Martin. The time is just after 4:30, and these are your latest GB News headlines. Some breaking news now from the last hour. Northamptonshire police have confirmed that 24-year-old Harshita Bella, who was found murdered in East London last week, was killed by strangulation. Officers attended her address following concerns for her welfare last Wednesday, leading to her body being located in the boot of a car in the Ilford area of London. Police are still searching for her husband, whom they have said is suspected of killing Harshita and then fleeing the country. Elsewhere, farming leaders have accused the Chancellor of refusing to engage with them over controversial changes to inheritance tax. That's as thousands of farmers have marched on Westminster today. First unveiled in Rachel Reeves' budget, the plans to impose inheritance tax on farms worth more than £1 million have sparked fury among rural communities. However, Environment Secretary Steve Reid says due to inheriting a £22 million black hole from the previous government, Labour had no choice.
This government's commitment to farming and to farmers is absolute. That's why we've allocated £5 billion to farming in the budget. That's the biggest amount of money in our country's history for sustainable food production. But we have to plug that £22 billion black hole in our public finances, otherwise we can't fix our public services like the broken National Health Service. So it's only right that we've had to ask the wealthiest landowners and the biggest farms to pay their fair share. But I would emphasise only around 500 farms will be affected. The vast majority of farmers will pay no more under the new scheme than they do under the current one.
Speaking at the protests earlier today, TV presenter and farm owner Jeremy Clarkson said Rachel Reeves has used a blunderbuss to hit farmers.
If she'd have wanted to take out the likes of James Dyson and investment bankers and so on, she would have used a sniper's rifle. But she's used a blunderbuss and she's hit all this lot. It was, as I understand it, it was a very rushed last-minute decision. And I think, you know, we all make mistakes in life, and I think it's time for them to say, you know what, we've cocked this one up a bit and back down. That's my view.
And a getaway driver who helped 4 teenagers kill 2 boys with machetes during a case of mistaken identity has been jailed for life for murder and will serve a minimum of 38 years in prison. 45-year-old Anthony Snook drove 18-year-old Riley Tolliver and boys aged 15, 16 and 17 to and from Knoll West in Bristol, where they murdered Mason Rist and Max Dixon. The 2 boys died from stab wounds after being chased by 4 armed teenagers in January of this year. Those are your latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Sophie Reaper. More from me in the next half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hello again. Here's your latest GB News weather forecast brought to you by the Met Office. A lot of cold weather around at the moment. Yes, sunny skies for some of us too, but also quite a few sleet and snow showers. Pushing in on a brisk northerly wind, and it's on this northerly wind that we're also dragging in that cold Arctic air, which is why temperatures are so far below average for the time of year. As we go through the rest of today, we will see a bit more cloud, a few outbreaks of rain across the far south clearing away, and then a lot of dry, clear weather for many of us, but plenty of wintry showers across parts exposed to that brisk northerly wind, so northern parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland, down the western side of Wales and also down the eastern part of the country too. Some very low temperatures with clear skies tonight. We are going to wake up to a harsh frost. The lowest temperatures will be across parts of Scotland. Last night it fell to -11. It could be even colder than that tonight, especially in places where there's some lying snow. Also watch out for some icy patches, especially where there are wintry showers. Also watch out for icy patches and some snow accumulations over parts of Northern Ireland. Mostly dry for inland areas, but both towards western and eastern fringes there will be the risk of some wintry showers, and these could cause some problems as we go through morning rush hour. Otherwise, as we go through tomorrow, we will continue to see some showers piling down on that relatively strong northerly wind. Most inland areas will avoid the showers, though they will penetrate quite far inland at times because of the brisk wind. That brisk wind is also going to make it feel pretty cold. These temperatures are well below average for the time of year. Even though there will be quite a bit of sunshine around, it really is going to feel quite raw. Little change as we go through the evening and overnight Wednesday into Thursday. Again, another cold, widely frosty night for many of us, and still some wintry showers to watch out for. Chance of some unsettled weather in the southwest on Thursday, and then by the weekend, things could be very wet and windy indeed. Bye-bye.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon. Hello again to you. I'm Jules Buckley. To Ballinluig in Perth and Kinross. Firstly, the A9 still closed for multi-vehicle collision causing queues. Still a queue south down the M74 Glasgow junction 3 to 4, so towards the M73 junction 1 follows an earlier collision there. Northbound M6 Middlewich to Knutsford, 18 to 19, a lane shut, slow going, there's a breakdown. A6 in Great Glen, the Leicester Road eastbound is shut from the Archers roundabout through towards the Burton Overy turn turn off and slow. There's an ongoing police incident. Now, the clockwise M25 is closed from junction 8 to 9. That's Reigate to Leatherhead for a medical emergency. The queue's back to the M23 junction 7. And a breakdown on the eastbound M27. A lane shut and slow at Fareham junction 9 towards Wickham at 10.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Welcome back. Time is 4:37. I'm Martin Daubney here on GB News. Now, as British farmers take to the streets in protest against planned changes to inheritance tax rules, French farmers have offered to show their British counterparts how it's done. In that latest round of protests earlier this week, farmers across the Channel have dumped manure and blocked roads in order to make themselves heard in France. Well, let's discuss how they might be able to give us some tips this side of the Channel. And to talk about that, I'm joined by the French farmer Stephanie Trio. Stephanie, welcome to the show. So this side of the Channel today was very polite. There were speeches at Parliament and meetings inside. Your side of the Channel, however, the French are much more direct. Tell us, do you think the English farmers could learn anything from our French cousins?
Well, I think at this point, the protest is not that huge in France. It's supposed to amplify by the end of the week, as far as I know. And I mean, so far, it's pretty mild compared to what it could be. I think people are in the street just because they couldn't get heard. And there was an initial discussion that was happening earlier in the year, in the first quarter, and it didn't obviously lead to the results that people expected. So therefore, they are once again in the street, and it's also prompted by the negotiation of a new treaty with South America, Mercosur, which has conditions which are not favorable for French farmers and European farmers in general.
And of course, Stephanie, at the G20 now in Brazil, your President Macron is there. And you're right, that deal is very impactful. It affects French producers, French farmers, cheap imports flooding your market, and of course, endless red tape from Brussels about how you're allowed to farm your land. And of course, net zero targets, all of which makes farming much, much more difficult in France. And it's fair to say that some of your farmers have been pretty militant. Did that more militant approach come soon? And was it effective?
I mean, so far, I don't think it was very effective. So, like I said, I mean, hopefully, this will finally be heard and be effective. Because at this point, I think the situation is quite worrying. A lot of people are really not in a great situation in terms of finance, and there's not really any sign of, let's say, regulatory pressure to calm down on, environmental matters. And sometimes I think it doesn't always make too much sense, the things that people need to comply with.
And Stephanie, do you think one thing that links us here in Britain and where you are in France is that we have politicians that don't seem to understand the countryside. They don't seem to understand farming. They seem to think that their metropolitan, their city, their liberal ways and their rules, that's the right way to go. And meanwhile, in the countryside, in the rural areas, they seem to be completely out of touch.
Yeah, I think there is a little bit of something around being out of touch in terms of how things are done, and asking people to implement measures that, in practice don't really make sense, because things just don't work like that. The machines don't work like they think they work. And I don't think any farmer is against protecting the environment, because it's their job. But you are constantly under the impression that, you might do something wrong. So it's not really something that people appreciate, especially at a time where things are difficult. And for instance, I mean, in terms of my own experience in the last few weeks, we just had pesticide usage control just at a time where we are basically harvesting corn, harvesting beetroot, and planting wheat. do you think it's the right time to come and bother people with this type of things?
The French public, they seem to be very supportive, at least from what we can see, of when the farmers, they blockade things, they dump manure outside town halls, they spray stuff around. Are the French public supportive of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think at this point, like I said, I don't think it's too massive, and most people do understand the anger at this point.
Okay, thank you very much for joining us on the show. That's the French farmer Stéphanie Trio. Thank you very much for joining us on GB News and giving us some tips this side of the channel. Thank you.
Thanks.
In case you didn't know, today is International Men's Day. Every day is International Men's Day, I hear critics cry. Well, it's not. It's November the 19th, and that's today. And I'll be joined in the studio by someone who thinks that this much mocked day is now more important than ever. A good friend of mine, Mark Brooks, OBE. He'll join me next in the studio. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
The latest Channel 4 Dispatches documentary has revealed details about the royal family's finances, including reports that private royal estates have received millions of pounds of income from public bodies and charities.
Morning, and morning, Stephen. Absolutely, I'm not shocked either. And also, as a former butler, I was also a duchy rentee. I used to rent one of the properties, and we were always aware of the property portfolio. I don't think it's kind of a bit news thing. Obviously, part of the, if you like, the business side is these two duchies, Cornwall and Lancaster, and the late Queen obviously was the Duke as well of Lancaster, and now you've got the Prince was obviously, or the King, when he was Prince, had the duchy. And these properties, portfolios as well, I mean, obviously they make money. I mean, but they've been around for, I think they go back to George III, if not before.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Why go out on a Friday night when Friday night comes straight to your home?
Talking about?
Join me and my A-team of top pundits. Chemistry tonight is electric. As we tackle the big stories of the day with wit, insight and fearless energy.
Man of the people.
It's all vibe.
Just a filing cabinet on wheels with a tie on.
So, order in Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, every Friday at 8, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Your time is 4:46. I'm Martin Daubney here on GB News. Now, in case you didn't know, it's not a case of it's every day is International Men's Day. Today is International Men's Day, a day to raise awareness around men's physical and mental health, to combat suicide and mainly to encourage men to talk more. Well, joining me in the studio is the Men's Policy Advisor and the Chair of Mankind Initiative and the International Ambassador for the UK for International Men's Day, good pal of mine, Mark Brooks. Mark, welcome to the studio.
Yeah, good to see you, my friend.
Have your company. So, International Men's Day, for those who aren't aware that it's today, November the 19th, tell us, what does it set out to achieve?
With three things in the UK. It's there to make a difference to the lives of men and boys, so talking about what support they need. Also bigging up around the charities that need support. There's loads more charities now in the UK supporting men and boys, so it's a good way of showing your support for them. And also around having a positive conversation about men, manhood, masculinity and all the great things that so many men do for their friends, family and for society.
See, this day, I used to be involved in International Men's Day back in the day. It was ridiculed, it was mocked. in Parliament. Now it's not. You've got a debate, I understand. Is it on Thursday?
That's right.
And what's being talked about in Parliament, and what do you hope to see as tangible victories for IND this year?
Well, there's been a big change in the last 5 years politically in terms of the conversation around men and boys issues. 5 years ago, and they were being mocked, and before that. But now we've had the last government and parliamentary inquiries on health strategy for men and boys, also around boys' education. And what we've seen in the new government and new MPs coming forward, a number of Labour MPs are now taking that mantle forwards. So we think there's going to be real progress politically in the next couple of years on men's health strategy, boys' education, and also trying to look at why we're losing 14 men a day to suicide. 200,000 young men are unemployed, and we've got 90,000 men in prison right now, enough to fill Wembley Stadium. We need to look at the reasons why they're committing crime that ends up putting them in prison.
And yet, Mark Brooks, if you believe at least the liberal media, if you're born male, if you're born white especially, you've won life's lottery. But you point out there something which I did a load of work on in the past, and that is the educational under-attainment of boys. They're behind at every demographic level, particularly the white working class. They are the bottom of the stack. They're the least likely to go to education. They're the most likely to go into unskilled work. And as a consequence, their bodies give up. They're forced into early retirement, and then they're most likely to have mental health issues, go towards addiction, and ultimately, tragically, go towards suicide. And yet, these are unfashionable conversations, but you're having them, so good on you. One thing that's caught our eye this year is because Chris Hoy, of course, has been very open about prostate cancer. That, of course, is on the rise amongst older men, and particularly in black men as well. Black men are much more likely to have that. And we saw this man van going around London, so it encourages people to go on board and get tested for prostate cancer. It's an awkward thing to talk about. Is that a huge barrier that you face in the past, just getting men to, there's that man van now, just to step up and go, it's all right to worry about your health. It's OK to be concerned about your mental health, and actually it's masculine, it's strong to stand out and reach for help?
Well, we're seeing more and more men coming forward to get help. It's helped by initiatives like the man van, and actually some of the work we've been doing in Parliament is that we want man vans everywhere, not just in that one in South London, and there was one in Manchester. We want them on every single industrial estate. We want them in every single place where men go. We want them outside football grounds, rugby grounds, cricket clubs, for example, because what's been the problem in the past is there's been an expectation that men have to fit around the health system. Well, if you're working long hours, you're working shifts, you're working away from home, for example, how are you actually going to get your NHS health check? Will your bosses allow you time off of work? So we've got to bring health closer to men. And initiatives like the man van, proven to be a success, we need them everywhere. That's why we need a health strategy that actually focuses on men to make sure that local NHS chiefs actually deliver on that.
Now, we've talked on this show quite often in the past about the need for perhaps a men's health minister, because we've got a women's health minister and we have a women and equalities minister, but none of those briefs, if you like, none of those remits tackle men's health. Is it fair to say that there's something of a competitive nature where men, it's well, you're a man. It's like, you fill the best jobs on the planet. You earn more. The gender pay gap. All these things are thrown out, and as a consequence, there's a feeling that men can't have it tough. But the reality is quite different.
Well, there's many men at the top, but there's huge numbers of men right at the bottom. Over 3,000 men will be sleeping rough tonight on our streets across the UK. For example, 33 men will die of prostate cancer. So whilst there's some men at the top, there's huge numbers at the bottom. And I think we're getting this political conversation now about actually we need to focus on those men that are having it tough. But it's also OK to have that conversation. 5 years ago, people like me were laughed out of court. Now we're not. Those issues and those charities that are being created all of the time, men's sheds, handyman's clubs, talk clubs. They're all being created and they're all being supported. So we're on the upward path, and long may that continue.
And Mark, I know that you're a founder of the Mankind Initiative. That's a charity for male victims of domestic violence. And I've been to your offices. You're out in Taunton that way still. And the amount of money that you get by on is a pittance. It's staffed by volunteers. There's a huge funding gap. And can we talk about something that's particularly passionate to our viewers, and that is veterans. Veterans seem so often overlooked and forgotten. They prepare to die for their country, they serve their country. On the way out, they seem to be overlooked. Tell us about the amazing work that's being done out there for them.
Well, in terms of veterans, what we're seeing is more focus on veterans than ever before. We've got some great organisations like SAFA, for example, and the British Legion doing great work. I mean, what we're also starting to see is particular suicide prevention plans and strategies around veterans, because one of the pieces of work that I've been working on last couple of years around suicide and what's some of the trigger points. And some of that is around transitions, i.e. when sudden changes happen to a man's life. And that's why focusing on issues, for example, like veterans, also on the isolation issues that many farmers face, for example. We've seen a big protest here in London. So I think there are more conversations and more money going into those services. We need far more, of course, but at least things are happening.
Mark Brooks, huge fan of your work. Thank you very much for coming in today. International Men's Day, November the 19th. Always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you very much indeed. Now we're crossing live to Rio de Janeiro next as Keir Starmer speaks from the G20 summit. But would he mention the masses, in fact, the tens of thousands, latest estimates, actually 20,000 angry farmers that descended on Westminster earlier on today. We had loads of them in our studio. They're not at all happy. They're out there and they demand to be listened to. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's News Channel. Now here's your weather, and it's Alex Burker.
Heavy showers first thing will be followed by a warm, cosy day. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again. Here's your latest GB News weather forecast brought to you by the Met Office. A lot of cold weather around at the moment. Yes, sunny skies for some of us too, but also quite a few sleet and snow showers. Pushing in on a brisk northerly wind, and it's on this northerly wind that we're also dragging in that cold Arctic air, which is why temperatures are so far below average for the time of year. As we go through the rest of today, we will see a bit more cloud, a few outbreaks of rain across the far south clearing away, and then a lot of dry, clear weather for many of us, but plenty of wintry showers across parts exposed to that brisk northerly wind, so northern parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland, down the western side of Wales, and also down the eastern part of the country too. Some very low temperatures with clear skies tonight. We are going to wake up to a harsh frost. The lowest temperatures will be across parts of Scotland. Last night it fell to -11. It could be even colder than that tonight, especially in places where there's some lying snow. Also watch out for some icy patches, especially where there are wintry showers. Also watch out for icy patches and some snow accumulations over parts of Northern Ireland. Mostly dry for inland areas, but both towards western and eastern fringes there will be the risk of some wintry showers, and these could cause some problems as we go through morning rush hour. Otherwise, as we go through tomorrow, we will continue to see some showers piling down on that relatively strong northerly wind. Most inland areas will avoid the showers, though they will penetrate quite far inland at times because of the brisk wind. That brisk wind is also going to make it feel pretty cold. These temperatures are well below average for the time of year. Even though there will be quite a bit of sunshine around, it really is going to feel quite raw. Little change as we go through the evening and overnight Wednesday into Thursday. Again, another cold, widely frosty night for many of us, and still some wintry showers to watch out for. Chance of some unsettled weather in the southwest on Thursday, and then by the weekend, things could be very wet and windy indeed. Bye-bye.
Expect a warm front, moving from the kitchen right through to the rest of the house. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm Jules Buckley. The southbound M1 traffic currently being held at junction 30 for work stop, queuing at the scene of a two-car and a lorry collision there. It's also being held on the southbound M5, nothing moving, Bridgewater south down to Taunton, junction 24 to 25. That's at the scene of a collision there for the M5 southbound in Somerset. Berkshire eastbound M4, Langley through towards the M25, junction 5 to 4, lane shut for a breakdown causing delays. Now the clockwise M25 still struggling, tailing back at the moment towards the M23 at 7. There's queues toward Leatherhead at 9, follows an earlier medical incident. And to Canterbury and Kent finally, the A28, that's Pin Hill, that's currently blocked both ways between the A2 and the Wincheap roundabout and queuing due to a multi-vehicle collision. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
This is the final week to grab your chance to win Christmas on Us this year. There's £20,025 in tax-free cash. There's £5,000 to spend on gifts for all the family. There's £500 to spend in your favourite supermarket. And a festively themed GB News goodie bag. We'll get it all to you in time for the big day. For another chance to win, call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2, or post your name and number to GB09 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 22nd of November. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+ and on the GB News app. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with GB News Radio. We are the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
A very, very good afternoon to you. It's 5 p.m. and welcome to the Martin Daubney Show here on GB News. Of course, we're broadcasting live from the heart of Westminster and all across the UK. Today, Westminster was a sea of woolly hats and wellies as over, they reckon, 20,000 British farmers gathered to roar a message of defiance to the government. Jeremy Clarkson bellowed back down. The NFU president demanded a sit down with a reluctant Rachel Reeves. Throughout today's show, I'll be joined in the studio here at GB News by key leaders, activists and farmers who are standing together crying, enough is enough. No farmers, no food. And meanwhile, as farmers fume in their freezing fields, the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, is living La Vida Loca. He's 6,000 miles away in subtropical Rio at the G20 summit. But he says he gets it. As he told GB News, his first job was on a farm. And pretty shortly, we'll be hearing from the Prime Minister within the next few minutes as he addresses the G20 live in Rio. And with farming on its knees and pensioners feeding the freeze and council tax going through the roof, is it any wonder that G&T has replaced the Great British Cup of Tea as the nation's favourite tipple? I'll raise an ice and a slice to this simply gin-credible tipple later in the show. Well, the show, always a pleasure to have your company. So, 20,000 farmers took to the streets earlier. Jeremy Clarkson was the star attraction. He had a pop at the BBC because they were having a pop at him. Nigel Farage turned up, Kemi Badenoch, Ed Davey. The politicians of all colours were out. We've had the activists, the leaders, farmers, in the studio already today for their touch. We'll have the president, beg your pardon, of the World Farmers Association, an angry Frenchman, on the show later on to see if we should be going down the same route as the French. And surely we'll be going to Rio live to talk to the Prime Minister as he addresses the G20. Get in touch, usual ways, gbnews.com/you'll say. But now here's your news headlines, and it's Sophie Reaper.
Thank you, Martin, and a very good evening to you. The time is just after 5 o'clock, and these are your latest headlines. Farming leaders have accused the Chancellor of refusing to engage with them over controversial changes to inheritance tax. That's as thousands of farmers have marched on Westminster today. First unveiled in Rachel Reeves' budget, the plans to impose inheritance tax on farms worth more than £1 million have sparked fury among rural communities. However, Environment Secretary Steve Reid says due to inheriting a £22 million black hole from the previous government, Labour had no other choice.
This government's commitment to farming and to farmers is absolute. That's why we've allocated £5 billion to farming in the budget. That's the biggest amount of money in our country's history for sustainable food production. But we have to plug that £22 billion black hole in our public finances. Otherwise, we can't fix our public services like the broken National Health Service. So it's only right that we've had to ask the wealthiest landowners and the biggest farms to pay their fair share. But I would emphasise only around 500 farms will be affected. The vast majority of farmers will pay no more under the new scheme than they do under the current one.
Meanwhile, among the thousands of farmers attending the protests today, there have also been many of the future generation hoping to take over their family's farm one day. Earlier, one of the farmer hopefuls told GB News he wants the government to rethink.
It's just important because family farms are what have provided food for England through 2 world wars and up to now. So it's a vital part of our economy. It's a way of life. It's not a job. I've been brought up around farming and I can't really imagine my life without it. I just want people to listen. I just want the government to hear what we're saying and at least have a look, go back to the drawing board and just see if they can do it better and help more family farms like us.
Northamptonshire police have confirmed that 24-year-old Harshita Bella, who was found murdered in East London last week, was killed by strangulation. Officers attended her address following concerns for her welfare last Wednesday, leading to her body being located in the boot of a car in the Ilford area of London. Police are still searching for her husband, whom they've said is suspected of killing Harshita and then fleeing the country. I believe we can now go to Rio de Janeiro, where Keir Starmer is addressing the G20.
Responsibility to find solutions for the problems facing the world today: climate change, poverty and hunger. And we made real progress. I was pleased to back President Lula's Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty to end the years of stagnation in the fight against poverty, because this is also an investment in stability and in tackling the factors that force people to leave their homes and make the long journeys that can end with criminal gangs exploiting them and putting their lives at risk in the English Channel. We will smash those gangs, but we will also work with others to address the root causes of the problem. And that's why here at the G20 meeting, we're building on our leadership in tackling climate change. And later this afternoon, we are launching our Global Clean Power Alliance, together with Brazil and other partners, to accelerate the clean energy transition, to cut energy bills, boost energy security, and reduce emissions around the world. We also made significant progress here in our bilateral discussions. With President Lula, we talked about our shared passions, football, of course, but also workers' rights and our shared desire to grow the £11 billion trading relationship between our two countries. As a statement of intent, I'm pleased to say that we have agreed that all future Brazilian sovereign bonds will be listed on the London Stock Exchange, showing once again the gravitational pull of the City of London. I also welcome new investments from Mexico and from Chile, including into battery recycling technology, which will create 750 new jobs in the United Kingdom. And with Prime Minister Modi, I discussed how we could deepen the unique ties between our two countries. We agreed to take forward an ambitious new UK-India comprehensive strategic partnership covering key issues like security, technology, climate, health and education. And starting with trade and investment, we therefore agreed to relaunch the FTA negotiations in the new year. With the Prime Ministers of Italy and Japan, I discussed how we can take forward our global combat air programme to build the next generation of fighter jets, boost our industrial capacity and strengthen our national security for the long term. We looked ahead to the establishment of a new GCAP headquarters, which is due to be based in the UK, creating hundreds of jobs. Finally, I met with President Xi. This was the first leader-level meeting between the United Kingdom and China for 6 years. We had frank, constructive and pragmatic discussions. As G20 economies and permanent members of the Security Council, and at a time of huge volatility, I think we both recognised the importance of engagement. I was clear that we will always act in our national interest and that we have a shared responsibility to work together on challenges like climate change and delivering growth. So we agreed to a new dialogue on those issues. Of course, there will continue to be areas where we don't agree, including their support for Russia's war and on Hong Kong. But here too, we need to engage. The lesson of history is that the more we're able to deal with problems, the world is safer when leaders talk. We also agreed to keep this channel of communication open. And under my leadership, Britain will never be absent from the world table. We will work with partners across the G20, but one nation stands apart. For the third year running, Putin did not attend this summit. He is the author of his own exile. And on day 1,000 of Russia's illegal war in Ukraine, I say again, end the war, get out of Ukraine, and in this moment, when global challenges are affecting us at home, I take the view more than ever that British leadership matters. So for the sake of our economic growth and our national security, we will keep stepping up on the international stage, delivering results as we have done here at the G20 and making our presence felt. Thank you. Now I'll take some questions, and I think I'm starting with Ollie at the Times. Ollie.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Ahead of this summit, you said that you wanted the G20 to double down on its support for Ukraine, but the final communique actually waters down previously agreed commitments by the G20. How disappointed are you by this?
Well, the communique does be absolutely clear about the UN Charter and sovereignty and territorial integrity, and obviously that's negotiated by quite a sort of diverse group. But as for the G20 and me doubling down, I used every opportunity, both in the main sessions, and I'm on the record for my clear position on Ukraine and what we need to do to double down, but also in the very many bilateral meetings that I've had with other country and other leaders here. And of course, there was a G7 statement last Friday that went out. Thank you. Richard at the Eye.
Thanks, Prime Minister. Prime Minister, should Brits prepare for nuclear war?
Say that again.
Should Brits prepare for nuclear war?
Look, there's irresponsible rhetoric coming from Russia, and that is not going to deter our support for Ukraine. We're now on day 1,000 of that conflict. That's 1,000 days of Russian aggression, 1,000 days of sacrifice in Ukraine. We have stood with Ukraine from the start, and I've been doubling down in my clear message that we need to ensure that Ukraine has what is needed for as long as is needed to win this war against Putin. Michael.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Why is your Rural Affairs Minister suggesting that farmers can avoid paying inheritance tax if they plan properly? Isn't this proof that your policy is hurting British farmers?
Look, on the question of farming, I think it's important I just restate that, firstly, £5 billion was set aside in the budget over the next 2 years for farming. That is the single biggest amount of money into farming and sustainable food production that has ever been set aside in any budget ever. So that's a real statement of intent in terms of supporting farmers. There's also money to deal with flooding, which is a huge problem for farmers, and money to deal with the outbreak of disease, which can be catastrophic for farmers if they lose their livestock. On the question of inheritance tax, the example I've given is a typical example of parents wanting to pass on a farm to one of their children. And in those cases, when you look at all the thresholds available, that means that only farms over the value of £3 million will be affected by the changes, and therefore the vast majority of farms will be unaffected. And those that are affected will only pay half the inheritance tax that other people pay, 20%, and they will have a 10-year period over which to pay it. And so that's why I'm very confident in saying that the vast majority will not be affected. How farmers then arrange their affairs within their family is obviously a matter for them. Thank you. I've got David at the Mirror.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Prime Minister, the government's own impact assessment suggests another 300,000 pensioners will be in absolute poverty and another 450,000 in relative poverty by 2030 as a result of the winter fuel payments cuts. How do you justify this, and how damaging is it that Scottish Labour have said that they'd reverse it?
In that analysis, I think it's important for me to point out what was left out of account in that analysis. The first is the considerable uptake in pension credit. Was not accounted for in those figures. We've had a campaign, as you know, to drive up pension credit, to get more pensioners onto pension credit, which obviously is not only a guarantee of the winter fuel allowance, but also gives the credit itself. So there's an additional benefit there. It leaves out of account the household support fund, which, as you know, in the budget was then extended. And it leaves out of account the warm homes discount. And, of course, on top of that, as we now know, the figure for the increase in state pensions for next year under the triple lock, because we've stabilised the economy, is about £470, and therefore pensioners will be better off because we've stabilised the economy. So far as Scotland is concerned, you know, that's one of the features of devolution. There are not infrequently different approaches taken in different nations across the United Kingdom. Thank you very much. Can I go to Jason at the Mail?
Thanks, Pim. I'll let you get your pen.
No, look, I always come prepared, just like that cagoule.
We'll make a journalist out of you,
at the Olympics.
Listen, you've talked a lot about protecting people's payslips in the budget, but it's becoming clear that thousands of people are going to lose their payslips altogether as a result of some of those national insurance hikes. The big retailers today are saying job cuts are inevitable. The Bank of England governor says that they're right, and actually the figure could be much higher than the 50,000 predicted by the OBR. What's your message to those working people who are going to lose their livelihoods as a result of the budget? Is that just the sort of necessary price for fixing the foundations?
Well, look, we took a number of difficult decisions in the budget and ensured that the pay slip in people's pockets is not affected. They will not be paying more, and they'll see that month on month in their pay slip. So far as the numbers affected, I mean, it is important, I think, to factor in the protection that we've put in place for employers, particularly small employers. So half of employers will either see no change to their NICs or they'll be paying less. And that is important because that's the difference we made by the changes we made to the employment allowance. So half of employers, as I say, no change or cuts to Nix. But look, we took difficult decisions, but fair decisions, to stabilise the economy and to make sure that we could put ourselves in a position where we could make very important investment then into our NHS, into our schools and into housing. Thank you. George, the FT.
Yeah, George Parkin.
Okay, and that was the Prime Minister Keir Starmer addressing the G20 summit in Rio de Janeiro. A few lines that leapt out. Of course, the most mentioned phrase by my reckoning was climate change. Tackling poverty and hunger was on there. A global alliance to do that. He reiterated his desire to smash the gangs, forming alliances at these conferences, a line which has been repeated to GB News quite a lot, trying to justify perhaps his 10th foreign trip in just 2 months. Never hear Keir, they're starting to call him. He also talked about a global clean energy alliance bringing down energy bills. Battery recycling with Luxembourg and Chile to create 750 jobs. An alliance on security and clean energy again with India. India, who doesn't even bother to stop polluting, but nevertheless, there we go. Hundreds of jobs apparently in an alliance with Italy and Japan on air defence, the global jet fighter plan. But of course, at these foreign jaunts, domestic politics will never really go away, and the journalists were pushing him again. One, should Brits prepare for nuclear war? Didn't really have a yes or a no to that. I guess, what do you say? And next, why is your Rural Affairs Minister telling farmers they can avoid inheritance tax if they plan properly? And once again, sticking to the line that it won't impact many farmers at all. Now, let's get some reaction to that in the studio back here in Westminster. I'm joined by GB News reporter Adam Cherry and political commentator Matthew Stadland. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Adam, let's start with you. So 6,000 miles away, the sun is shining, but back on the streets of Westminster where you've been all day, it's very, very frosty. And certainly there, the issue of British farmers feeling like they've been short done by, that still was dominating this chat, even though it's right over there in Rio de Janeiro.
Yeah, I mean, they try and have it both ways. They say difficult decisions. You heard that, the party line there, we've taken tough decisions here. We've heard this all week, really, the £22 billion black hole. We're familiar with these terms. But then on the other hand, they say, don't worry, you know, you're not really going to feel the pinch because we're giving you $5 billion here, a few billion there. You can make your tax arrangements in such a way that people, I just don't think the public buy this. Either it's painful or it's not. If it's 22 billion, that's a lot of cash, and people are going to think, well, this money needs to come from somewhere. It's probably going to come from my pocket. And that is the difficulty they have. That's why they're answering so many questions on this, because they're not tackling this effectively. On China and India, interesting, talking about tackling climate with those two countries. I mean, good luck with that. Our emissions are, what, 1%, 2%? I'm not sure the exact figures, but the general, you know, the spirit of this is those guys are responsible for almost all the emissions globally. And a few friendly conversations, the first in 6 years, between China and the UK at top level. Is that really going to make any progress? You could argue that that's necessary to have that dialogue. That's what he said in that speech. I'm not sure. Did that work for David Cameron and George Osborne? I don't think it did.
Matthew Stadland, do you think that once the champagne corks stop popping in Rio de Janeiro and Sir Keir Starmer comes back to reality, his inbox is going to be pretty full with unpleasant messages, and today the message loud and clear on the streets of Westminster: British farmers feel very, very let down by his government.
I mean, the idea, Martin, that Starmer is on some sort of freebie is for the birds. I mean, he is working incredibly hard, flying around the world. And from my point of view, I rather like to see our Prime Minister showing some leadership, being there on the international stage. And one of the reasons for that is because so many of the problems in the world that affect us are global. So let me give you one quick example. You talked about climate change. If climate change continues apace, then we're going to bear the consequences. And that isn't just about immediate impact of the weather on Britain.
More expensive energy bills.
Let me explain it to you. So if people leave low-lying land, let's take Bangladesh as an example, incredibly low-lying country with a lot of people in it. If climate change negatively impacts Bangladesh, you're going to have a load of people who want to move elsewhere. And what does that result in? An even bigger migration crisis. It's a question of extent. It's a question of extent. Even bigger migration crisis than we have now. And not just Bangladesh, sub-Saharan Africa. So we need to address climate change, or in the end, we pay much, much more in various ways.
Isn't this typical of the notion that the telescope seems to be flipped the wrong way? Climate change in Bangladesh, great. Climate change in the Sahara, great. What about farmers in Westminster?
Well, let's talk about farmers. Let's talk about farmers.
They feel absolutely hard done by. Isn't that the point?
Hang on.
Should it be jet set, Stormer? Well, how about dealing with what's in your in trade back in Blighty?
You spend an enormous amount of time, both on your own show and on social media, talking about the boats and the crisis as you see it. I want the boats to stop. And I will tell you this, as I say, the boats will increase in the long term if parts of the world become uninhabitable. Let me address the farmer issue specifically. I do have some sympathy for those who are just above the threshold, those who've been expecting to continue working on the family farm. And if I had been the government, I would have personally set the threshold a little higher. I absolutely understand why they're going after the big farms, because a lot of people, or some people, who own a huge amount of land are in farming, partly so that they can avoid tax. In 2021 to 22, there were 117 inherited farms that were worth more than £2.5 million. Just 117. And you can get a situation where if you are a couple who are farmers, you can hand over up to £3 million without any inheritance tax at all. That is the scale of the problem we're talking about. Yes, I have sympathy for individuals, but we have more than one-third of our children in this country, we've discovered in the last day with this new report, living in poverty. And we are banging on and on and on about a tiny minority of people who are very asset wealthy.
20,000 people were out on the streets of Westminster today, and when Jeremy Clarkson said, who will be impacted by this tax grab here? You know, put your hands up. They all did.
That's not. I'm sorry, but the idea that that's scientific, the idea that Jeremy Clarkson asking people to raise their hands. This is a man who, in 2021, told the Times, as I understand it, the critical reason he wanted to buy his £4 million farm was to avoid inheritance tax. Today he said it's because of hunting, but luckily he gets an inheritance tax break.
What about the thousands and thousands of farmers who will be dragged into this?
They won't.
What about? Well, they say they will.
Well, the figures. There's a big dispute about the figures.
3 million figure, right? That's if you're in a couple.
Yes, that's what I said.
Correct. A lot of farms aren't arranged like that. It's a granddad, it's a son, it's brothers, or whatever. So it is much lower for a lot of those families. And also, like we've discussed, they are asset rich but cash poor. A lot of them barely turn over.
A lot of farmers, a lot of farmers. Some are hugely wealthy.
Well, of course, But I think that we're talking in general terms here because we're talking about the whole country. So, they don't have the cash. They're being asked, all right, over a 10-year period, to shrink their farm smaller and smaller to pay for a bill that they can't afford. What do you think what effect is that going to have on food prices, which is going to affect poor people too?
People who have parents who own houses of £1 million or whatever the threshold is are already and have been for a very, very long time and will continue to pay inheritance tax. So what you're arguing for is special pleading for farmers.
Yeah, because farmers are special because they produce food.
So are nurses, so are doctors, so are the people who are clearing out the dust from my kitchen, which has just been ripped out. We've got to live in the real world. We're talking about most nurses won't be hit by inheritance tax because their parents don't have that sort of wealth. We're talking about people who are extremely wealthy compared to the vast majority of people in the country. Do you know how many people each year? Do you know how many estates each year have inheritance tax applied? How many estates each year? I'm not talking about farming, overall in the country. 4%. Exactly, or just under 4%. This is an aspirational issue where people are against it for aspirational reasons, those who are. But actually, we have to tax to get our public services moving.
How much is it going to raise?
Gentlemen, I've been told...
About £500 million by the end of the time. Yeah, it's not a huge amount of money. Wow. But what do you...
That's going to pay for what?
Do you know
3 X-ray machines?
X-ray machines. Do you know how many people are languishing on an NHS waiting list? An enormous number of people are seriously struggling, and we are obsessing about extremely wealthy, as in terms of assets, farmers.
We have to leave it there, gentlemen. Great spirited debate, but I'm simply being told, well, I'm being screamed at. We have to move on. Adam Cherry and Matthew Sadland. Excellent. Now, still to come, I'll be speaking to the president of the World Farmers Organisation, a passionate French farmer, Monsieur Arnold. He thinks maybe we should be a bit more lively this side of the channel. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's News Channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
What about train Wi-Fi? The Times. It's so funny the Times did this story because I was on the train yesterday trying to do some work and connecting to the Wi-Fi, and it happens all the time. It just doesn't work. It's pathetic. And then I opened the Times and they've done a massive investigation. Loads of different rail routes from north to south.
Was that the James Bond thing, right?
Yes. Yeah.
I think, well, that passenger got through, or almost got through, one episode one James Bond
film.
movie in 8 hours.
But you know, it's interesting. We call it train Wi-Fi, but it isn't. It's just really a SIM card on a train, really. So if your own phone's not going to get signal, why would we assume that the train's going to have signal? It just doesn't work like that. Unless you're in Japan or South Korea, whose infrastructure is infinitely better than ours, you're just not going to get signal. You have to download those films way before you get on
There is technology that can help with that. You know, there really is. If they found ways to put it underground, they can get it on ground and get you going. I definitely think, you know, with the price that we're paying for these tickets, they can get the Wi-Fi going. There is technology.
That's why it's so frustrating, isn't
Call
it?
Elon, get a Starlink. Let's go.
If you're a passenger paying hundreds of pounds for a season ticket or whatever you call it, and you know, commute to work every single day, and you're paying all this money, and you can't.
It's so expensive. You'd expect Wi-Fi at the basic. Yeah, exactly.
But it happens with phone signal as well. I'll be walking down London in Park Lane or somewhere else, or down on the south coast. I just don't have phone signal, and I think to myself, what on earth is going on?
Doesn't it feel like 5G's made it worse, though?
Yeah.
Because I feel like 4G, that didn't happen so much, but 5G just feels like...
Yeah, and then I always get this little E in the top corner of my phone, and I don't get any signal. I think it's got worse over the past couple of years. Yeah, especially with 5G. I agree with that.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 5:29. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, the Prime Minister's been speaking from a press conference at the G20 summit in Brazil. And we had a very lively exchange before the break. Let's pick up again on that. And I'm joined by GB News reporter Adam Cherry and the political commentator Matthew Stadland. Gentlemen, welcome back. Adam, you've been out on the streets talking to hundreds of farmers since the crack of dawn. Just so we get away from the politics and the theory, what's the reality of what they've been telling you today?
Well, to say the obvious, they're all frustrated. It wasn't a wasn't an angry crowd. It was an upset crowd, I'd say. And actually, I will bring the politics in a little bit because we heard from some politicians. We heard from Kemi Badenoch, Ed Davey, and a couple of others. You know what? Even though this decision was made by a Labour government, there's not a lot of love for anyone in Westminster from the
don't forget there was a protest against the Conservatives in March.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say. So when Clarkson arrived, we were talking briefly in the break about him. When he arrived, that was the rock star moment, as you'd expect. But it was obvious that they weren't. You know, Kemi Badenoch fine, Ed Davey fine, but this is clearly more than just a protest against one government's decision in one budget, I think.
But Adam, doesn't the Jeremy Clarkson involvement seriously backfire on the farmers? And as I've said, I have sympathy for some of the farmers who are close to that threshold, even though loads of money can still be passed on and inherited completely tax-free. But you hear people on the right and the hard right who've been lambasting those wealthy celebrities supporting Kamala Harris 1 minute, and then you get Jeremy Clarkson, who's clearly hugely wealthy.
What's the hard right got to do with it?
Hang on. I'm distinguishing between the right and the hard right, but people on the right of politics are seriously critical of these rich celebrities coming out for Kamala. Now we've got Jeremy Clarkson, a seriously wealthy dude who bought his farm so he could shoot and knew that he was going to get the benefit of inheritance tax-free on that.
But he's sticking up for those on the breadline.
Or is he sticking up for himself? People are on the breadline. I'll tell you who's on the breadline, and I'll make this point again. More than a third of children living in our country are literally living in poverty, a quarter of adults. Well, why isn't Nigel Farage and your mates out protesting for these people?
Hang on a minute. If their food prices start going through the roof because farmers...
I don't believe they will.
How do you know that?
I can't...
If there are less farmers...
I don't believe they will.
They're selling off their land. There'll be less farms, there'll be less British food. We'll rely on importation, and that means destroying our sovereign farming base. It means increasing the carbon footprint by importing stuff we could be producing domestically. It means decimating jobs, and how can it mean cheaper food?
It's not clear yet how this will resolve itself. It's possible that bigger farms will buy up these smaller farms, which I don't think is the best answer. I like the idea of smaller farms. I do actually also like the idea of an attachment to the land, and that's one of the reasons I have sympathy for farmers. But you have to put it in context, which is that those estates that pay inheritance tax are doing just that, paying inheritance tax, and there seems to have been this exception for farmers. Why?
OK, gentlemen, spiritist of Matthew, Adam, excellent, but I'm afraid we have to move on. Lots more still to come between now and 6 o'clock, including I'll be speaking to the president of the World Farmers Organisation, a passionate French farmer, Monsieur Arnaud, to see what he thinks about what we should be doing this side of the channel. But first, here's your latest news headlines, and it's Sophie Reaper.
A very good evening to you. Let's take a look at your latest headlines. Farming leaders have accused the Chancellor of refusing to engage with them over controversial changes to inheritance tax. That's as thousands of farmers have marched on Westminster today. First unveiled in Rachel Reeves' budget, the plans to impose inheritance tax on farms worth more than £1 million have sparked fury among rural communities. Speaking at the protests in Westminster, Shadow Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Victoria Atkins says the impact on farmers will be huge.
And the real-life impacts of this are enormous, because we know already around kitchen tables in farms up and down the country, farmers have got advice from their accountants, from their business advisors, and they are deeply, deeply worried and distressed that if older members of the family live past March 2026, when this change comes in, then they are faced with an enormous inheritance tax bill when that dear beloved relative passes on. And when I say, huge bills, we're talking hundreds of thousands of pounds, possibly even over £1 million.
Elsewhere, Russia says Ukraine has fired US-supplied long-range missiles into the country for the first time today. The Ministry of Defence in Moscow says Ukraine used the Army tactical missile system in a strike on Russia's Bryansk region this morning, although Ukraine is yet to comment. Now, Russia has also said it's changed its nuclear policy as Moscow signals anger over the US missile decision. Downing Street's responded today, saying Putin's decision to raise the issue of nuclear weapons again is, quote, the latest example of irresponsibility from the depraved Russian government. A short while ago, Sir Keir Starmer addressed the G20 in Brazil, telling Putin to get out of Ukraine.
Under my leadership, Britain will never be absent from the world table. We will work with partners across the G20, but one nation stands apart. For the third year running, Putin did not attend this summit. He is the author of his own exile. And on day 1,000 of Russia's illegal war in Ukraine, I say again, end the war, get out of Ukraine.
Those are your latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Sophie Reaper. More from me in the next half an hour.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club. proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
But before I go, here's a look at today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2651 and €1.1951. The price of gold is £2,080.21 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 8,071.47 points.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hello again. Here's your latest GB News weather forecast brought to you by the Met Office. A lot of cold weather around at the moment. Yes, sunny skies for some of us too, but also quite a few sleet and snow showers. Pushing in on a brisk northerly wind, and it's on this northerly wind that we're also dragging in that cold Arctic air, which is why temperatures are so far below average for the time of year. As we go through the rest of today, we will see a bit more cloud, a few outbreaks of rain across the far south clearing away, and then a lot of dry, clear weather for many of us, but plenty of wintry showers across parts exposed to that brisk northerly wind, so northern parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland, down the western side of Wales and also down the eastern part of the country too. Some very low temperatures with clear skies tonight. We are going to wake up to a harsh frost. The lowest temperatures will be across parts of Scotland. Last night it fell to -11. It could be even colder than that tonight, especially in places where there's some lying snow. Also watch out for some icy patches, especially where there are wintry showers. Also watch out for icy patches and some snow accumulations over parts of Northern Ireland. Mostly dry for inland areas, but both towards western and eastern fringes there will be the risk of some wintry showers, and these could cause some problems as we go through morning rush hour. Otherwise, as we go through tomorrow, we will continue to see some showers piling down on that relatively strong northerly wind. Most inland areas will avoid the showers, though they will penetrate quite far inland at times because of the brisk wind. That brisk wind is also going to make it feel pretty cold. These temperatures are well below average for the time of year. Even though there will be quite a bit of sunshine around, it really is going to feel quite raw. Little change as we go through the evening and overnight Wednesday into Thursday. Again, another cold, widely frosty night for many of us, and still some wintry showers to watch out for. Chance of some unsettled weather in the southwest on Thursday, and then by the weekend, things could be very wet and windy indeed. Bye-bye.
The latest GB News travel.
Good evening, I'm Johnny Ratner. Big problems in Derbyshire on the M1. The inside lane on that 4-lane stretch closed off southbound at junction 30. The work stop turn off after a lorry collided with two cars, causing long queues back towards Sheffield, back over the South Yorkshire border. And in Leicestershire, the A6, the Leicester Road, has been closed to the southeast of Leicester, off the Archers roundabout at Great Glen, full of police investigation. On the M40 in Buckinghamshire, lanes closed on the southbound Exeter junction to the Beaconsfield Services exit and the scene of a crash. One to bear in mind if you're heading towards London on the M40. On the M5 in Somerset, one lane's closed southbound, junction 24 to 25 towards Taunton, following an accident. And trains are suspended between Bristol, Temple Meads and Severn Beach. It's problems with the signals, Great Western Railway tell us. And that's the very latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Welcome back. Your time is 5:39. I'm Martin Daubney here on GB News. Now let's go straight to our man in Rio de Janeiro now. It's GB News' political editor, Christopher Hope, who's just been at the Prime Minister's press conference there. Chris, welcome back to the show. So, around about 40 minutes ago, Sir Keir Starmer addressed the G20. Tell us the highlights of his speech.
Hi, Martin. Yeah, welcome back to Rio de Janeiro, where I'm here with the Prime Minister, a meeting of world leaders. Yeah, he's attempts here by the Prime Minister to talk about his activity over the past 2 days here, focused on great investment, growth and security. He's done all sorts of deals. He talked yesterday to President Xi, looking at a bilateral meeting shortly and trying to find common cause there to work with China after years in the deep freeze under the Tory government between Beijing and London. Also, he met with the Indian leader last night. President Lula of Brazil, the meeting there, that's just taken place. The new deal to allow sovereign bonds from Brazil to be traded on the London Stock Exchange. Putin's not here, he said, for the third year running. We all know why, because of the invasion by Russia of Ukraine 3 years ago. Sergei Lavrov has been here, but those sources in number 10 describe how, as he moved around this summit, the G20, he's like a metallic object repelling iron filings. No one will go near Russia, not least because, of course, the escalation in fighting over the night, with 6 missiles fired from deep in Ukraine, deep into Russia. Big issues there. But he flies back tonight, Sir Keir Starmer. London, Westminster, and very, very cross farmers. Earlier, I asked him if he didn't get the issue of why farmers are so cross, whether Labour was too urban. And here's what he had to say.
Party too urban, that's what Baroness Melia says. She's the Countryside Alliance president. You don't really get the countryside. When were you last on a farm, for example?
My first job was on a farm, Jay. I grew up in the countryside. All of my entire family live in the countryside. We're a rural family. I'm the only one that lives in a city. I do get it, and that's why I'm able to say with confidence that that threshold, for a typical case at £3 million, is a very high threshold. And therefore the vast majority of farmers will be unaffected.
There's Sir Keir Starmer there saying he does get it. He has a farming background, almost farmer Starmer, but he won't do the hard yards for farmers. He won't lift this threshold of 1% of £1 million, forgive me, on estates, and whether he won't do that. I mean, that's the problem. That's why we heard so much anger both in your studio and across the channel today from farmers. This one will not go away, and Sir Keir Starmer flies back overnight into real concern here for many farmers. Will he lift that threshold to maybe much higher to take those working farms out of the equation, Martin?
Chris Oak, beautiful, live from Rio. There we have it. The son of a toolmaker was also a mini farmer Starmer in a previous life. Thank you very much. Now, as British farmers take to the streets in protest against planned changes to inheritance tax rules, French farmers have offered to show their British counterparts how it's done. I'm delighted now to say I can speak to the president of the World Farmers Organisation, Arnaud Delasiac. Welcome to the show, Arnaud. Absolute pleasure to have your company. So, of course, the French farmers have protested long and hard, and they've had some success. Could you give us any advice about how British farmers could perhaps engage with our politicians this side of the channel?
Good evening, Martin, and hello to everybody. I'm very glad to talking with you. I don't know if we can. I will give you some idea. First of all, always keep to have the support of the population, because the best protestation you can make, the nicest, and the always try to get the support of the population. And I think it's important to explain how unfair can be the proposal of your government, and because we are in a big competitiveness between English farmer and the rest of the world, and when you create taxation in an open world, in fact you put pressure on the competitiveness of your farmer.
Monsieur Delasiac, of course, President Macron is also in Brazil. Meanwhile, the French farmers are unhappy again, and that's because of South American deals, cheap imports flooding your market, making it very, very difficult for your farmers to be profitable, to be competitive. And so even in France now, there's a feeling that farmers are still not being listened to.
The Mercosur agreement is in negotiation since 25 years, and we are afraid that the implementation of this agreement can be done very soon. That's why we are protesting. We have a minority in Europe who is opposite to this agreement, and we don't know how it will finish. But it's time to put pressure, because we have the G20, and it's a time where it can be concluded. That's why we demonstrate yesterday and today.
And Monsieur de Latillac, we see their pictures on screen of French farmers blockading motorways with tractors, even more radical, spraying manure around town halls. Are these tactics effective? Have they been popular with the French public? And at the moment, British farmers are being very, very polite. But do you think maybe there's room for farmers to be more radical?
I don't know if we are always radical. The media can show some time where we spray manure, but most of the time, and most of our farmers are very quiet. They just they make sitting on the road, sitting with tractors, but affecting sitting. Non-violence is always our first condition. But of course, you have some extremists in our rank, but most of the time in minor farmers' organization, not in our major organization.
That's excellent. Thank you very much for joining us. It's a pleasure to have your company. And that's the president of the World Farmers Organization, Monsieur Arnaud de Latillac. Thank you very much for joining us on GB News, and I hope to have your company again in the future. Now, here's one for you. Which drink has overtaken the Great British Cup of Tea as the nation's favourite tipple? I'll reveal all next. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's News Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
But it turns out there's a growing number of grandparents who are now taking up the hobby.
And not all of them are male. 7 million gamers are aged over 50, 7 million of them. And we're going to introduce you to one this morning. Her name's Kath Bowie. She's 76 years of age, and Kath has become a worldwide star of the game Fortnite. Good to see you, Kath.
Hello, good morning to both of you.
And tell me this, Kath, is Bowie your real name?
Bowie. Yeah,
Bowie.
Yeah, it is my real name, yes.
And you do it a Bowie and not a Bowie?
It's a Bowie, yes, definitely Bowie, yes.
Bowie or Bowie?
Bowie.
Bowie.
But that's not what the Jim Bowie was called, or Jim Bowie was called in the Alamo. He was a Bowie.
No, but that's what I'm called, Kath Bowie.
Oh, right.
She's their own superstar.
You are your own superstar. You are indeed. Well, so we're led to believe, Kath, that there's nobody else like you, or very few people like you, but there is. There is lots of people your age, your stage, doing what you do.
Yes, there's not a lot that streams. Okay, Fortnite, but there's definitely plenty that plays. Any game, you know what I mean? It doesn't have to be Fortnite. It can be any game.
So, Kath, how did you get started in all of this?
Oh, yeah, well, it's 7 years ago, actually. I walked into my teenage grandson's bedroom and just saw him playing what I now know, of course, what I play is Fortnite. And that was the very first week that Epic had released it. And it was just really love at first sight.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, and on the GB News app. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with GB News Radio. We are the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's Last Orders, 10 to 6. I'm Martin Daubney here on GB News. Now, the unthinkable has happened. Gin and tonic has overtaken tea as Britain's favourite drink. Can this be true? And joining us now to discuss this is the comedian Mike McLean. Mike, always a pleasure, and raise a glass to you. What on earth's going on? The cup has been nudged off the top spot. What is it? We're all trying to drink to forget?
I don't know what it is. I just think that gin's just massively popular. It's one of the most popular drinks in the UK. Last year, it was £750 million spent on drink and gin. Can you believe that? We're one of the biggest drinkers. I've got a best mate of mine from back home in Manchester, Derek Broadhurst. And in our 20s, we drunk lager. In our 30s, we drunk beer. I went round to his house. He's got a gin cabinet. Like, I sent the picture in, and I think you've got it. He's got a gin cabinet with over 150 different... there it is there. He's got 150 different kinds of gin. I've known him all my life. I didn't even know he drank gin. But it is the most popular drink now.
So, Mike, what you're trying to say is that you thought you had a good friend, and he's a secret gin ponks. He's got a gin cabinet...
He does. He loves gin so much he has it first thing in the morning, afternoon, evening. He drinks it a lot, to be fair. Yeah. He would have been on the show today, but he's having a gin and tonic. But it is. I still love tea, but gin is just... The sales of it have gone through the roof.
Yeah, it's got to be said, like you say, 750 million quid's worth. That is £750 million worth of gin. In fact, that's 50% more than the government had planned to raise by taxing farmers. There's more money in gin than there is in the farming community. Maybe the two are connected. Maybe we're all going to start drinking gin to try and think about how cold it is, how rubbish the country seems to be feeling. But you are right. There are gin bars now in my home city of Nottingham. There's a gin bar. My dad going to a gin bar. What kind of idiot goes to that? The answer is, Mike, it's packed.
I've been to that one, Martin, in Nottingham. I've actually been into that gin bar in Nottingham. And you're right. I think if more people, especially in the government, drunk gin, the world would be a better place. Everybody would be more relaxed, more chilled, you know. And I think it's a real British thing, isn't it? A gin and tonic, you know. It's the most popular drink in the world, but especially in England, you don't see people in other countries. I've travelled around the world, and not many people go, "I'll have a gin and tonic." But in England, they love a gin and tonic with a little bit of the old lemon in, don't they?
I've got to say, if I get on a plane, it's always my go-to drink. I don't know what it is. It's just like deep in my psyche. But what's going on with the humbug cup of tea? I'll tell you what's being killed off. Mine's been killed off by coffee toffs.
Well, I tell you what, I'm still fighting for the tea because I'm a first in the morning cup of tea. I'm a tea man, so I'm not a big drinker, Martin. So I'm just going to keep flying the flag for tea. Oh, look at that! That's some great examples of tea there. You can't beat a good British cup of tea for me. That's what I say.
Well, maybe, Mike, the answer is to pour a slug of gin into your cup of tea and double down on both of your pleasures. Mike McLean, absolute pleasure to have you on the show. Never a chore. Now, loads you begin to touch on today's show. Andy says this: Labour has discovered more black holes than the entire scientific community in Earth's history. I see what we did there. Anne-Marie says this: I'm so impressed with the maturity of today's young farmers. Not like some of our screen-obsessed offspring who can barely tie their own shoelaces, my kids included. Sadly, and they are better than many. It just goes to show how the surrounding environment can shape a young mind. Quickly, last word today goes to Andy. This is serious for the country. No farmers mean no food security. If they're sold, who would own the farmland? No one would farm it anymore. We cannot live without farmers. And that's it from me. Jubes & Co. is up next. Now, I'm back tonight, 9 to 11. I'll be covering for Patrick Christie's tonight with a live studio audience. That is going to get seriously lively. Please tune in. I'll see you then. Maybe you can have a gin and tonic before that. See you later on, but now it's your weather. And here is Alex Burkle. Have a great one.
There will be a light breeze in the morning, leading to a warm front. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again. Here's your latest GB News weather forecast brought to you by the Met Office. A lot of cold weather around at the moment. Yes, sunny skies for some of us too, but also quite a few sleet and snow showers. Pushing in on a brisk northerly wind, and it's on this northerly wind that we're also dragging in that cold Arctic air, which is why temperatures are so far below average for the time of year. As we go through the rest of today, we will see a bit more cloud, a few outbreaks of rain across the far south clearing away, and then a lot of dry, clear weather for many of us. But Plenty of wintry showers across parts exposed to that brisk northerly wind, so northern parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland, down the western side of Wales and also down the eastern part of the country too. Some very low temperatures with clear skies tonight. We are going to wake up to a harsh frost. The lowest temperatures will be across parts of Scotland. Last night it fell to -11. It could be even colder than that tonight, especially in places where there's some lying snow. Also watch out for some icy patches, especially where there are wintry showers. Also watch out for icy patches and some snow accumulations over parts of Northern Ireland. Mostly dry for inland areas, but both towards western and eastern fringes there will be the risk of some wintry showers, and these could cause some problems as we go through morning rush hour. Otherwise, as we go through tomorrow, we will continue to see some showers piling down on that relatively strong northerly wind. Most inland areas will avoid the showers, though they will penetrate quite far inland at times because of the brisk wind. That brisk wind is also going to make it feel pretty cold. These temperatures are well below